Okay, good evening, everyone. Wendy, will you please call the roll? Here.
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 Yeah.
Is he muted? Here.
We
Dennis
can't
is-
hear Wendy very well.
Can't hear Wendy.
I did mark you present. Counselor.
Okay.
Dennis, she marked you present, okay? All right, thank you. Okay, we have a quorum? Okay, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Just to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have, good evening, everyone. We have our hardworking members of our planning board with us. We have, I believe Ron Wolanski's on. And tonight's meeting is about, before I read it in, is about, kind of getting together and figuring out, what's important, which really want to come up with a priority list. It could be short-term, it could be long-term. But also we want the planning board's feedback. You guys work hard. You put a lot of hours in, and we just want to make sure that we're all, kind of pulling the rope from the same end. Sometimes we may disagree on issues and we may disagree on how to get there. But at the end of the day, we're all just trying to get on the same page. And I think it's healthy that we have this meeting. I think the purpose, at least in my mind, unless the council sees something different tonight, is the other my fellow colleagues is to hopefully come away with some priorities this evening. And then there's some other issues, obviously, we need to discuss as well. I did talk to communicate with Paul Croce, the chairman of the planning board yesterday. I'm certainly not one that likes any type of surprises. So Paul and I had a short conversation on, his thoughts as the chair of the planning board and what his expectations might be. So it's just good discussion tonight. And I know, Paul, you want to make you would like to make an opening comment or some remarks. So
Mr. President?
yes,
excuse me.
yes, ma'am.
It would be nice if the planning board introduced themselves to the
We
new council.
we were good. Yes, ma'am. We actually talked about that yesterday, but thank you. I like that you're on the ball tonight.
For the old lady?
No, I didn't say that. You did. We will briefly, we'll do it now. We do have some new council members. There are some members that of the planning board that may not know some of the council members, and some council members may not know the planning board members. So you want me to introduce, or do you guys just want to say a couple of words? It's up to you.
Tom Welch.
That was pretty brief.
Works.
Chris,
And Teresa Santos?
Paul, I can't hear her.
you can't hear anybody, Dennis, or just certain?
Not really. need
Teresa's
to
very
speak up.
quiet.
Okay, I'll make sure everyone's speaking into the mics. Can the planning board members hear us?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Dennis, it might be on your end. I'm not sure, but we'll do the best we can.
Well, it's not
Okay?
you I'm having a hard time hearing. It's Teresa.
Okay. All right. We'll have her speak into that mic. Mrs. Vaughn.
Barbara Von Villas?
Okay. We have Chris.
Christopher Logan, pleasure to meet everybody.
Okay. Terry and Dennis.
Terry Flynn, right here. Nice to see
I think
everybody.
they all know me, Dennis.
Okay. Paul, if you want to make a few remarks, and then your folks from the planning board could certainly introduce themselves, because I know when before the meeting started, a couple of us were looking, going, well, who's that? Who's that? So that'd be nice. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just some very brief comments before we get started. Good evening, and good evening, members of the town council. First, on behalf of the planning board, I'd like to congratulate President Rodriguez, Vice President Welch, and Councilor Logan for your new positions on the council. And I wish you well in your council endeavors. I would also like to thank all the council members for reappointing BJ and myself to another term on the planning board. I believe we have a very good working group with the current membership, and your action allows us to have another year working together. I hope and expect we will continue to be productive for the council and for Middletown. With due respect, however, I would request that in the future, the appointments to the planning board not be delayed as they were this year. As for this meeting, the main purpose is to make sure the planning board priorities are the same as the town council's priorities. We heartily agree we should be working toward the same goals, and I think we are. However, a meeting like this is good to have periodically just to make sure. The two documents you have listed on the agenda include most of the items that are important to planning board members, though not all. We'd also like to address those not listed, which I believe are priority items for you also. So we welcome this opportunity to receive your input, to have a good, productive discussion, and to assure our full alignment with you going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I just didn't know, I want to know if you guys just want to take a minute to introduce yourselves. Again, some of us may not know you, even though we appointed you. There's some new members here. I think we know faces but again, we have some new members. So it'd be great if you guys would just do a brief introduction, please.
I'll start. Paul Croce. I've been on the planning board for 6 years, and looks like it'll be another 3. Thank you very much.
So Paul, I'll go next if you can hear me. And Bill Nash, I apologize for not having my video on. I actually think the photo that you might see is a pretty good reflection of me. Not a great photo, but actually pretty good. Anyway, I'm actually traveling for work. Yay. I get to travel again, which is what I do. And I happen to be traveling now, so I am listening in. And not appropriate, I don't think, to put my video on while I'm going 65 miles an hour down the highways, but I'm glad to participate. Anyway, I've been on the planning board for, I believe, 5 years now. I get reappointed next year, I hope. But looking forward to continuing to work with the current board members and the council on some of these very important planning items that are coming before us, and hopefully building on what we've done in the past under, I've got to say at this point, the great leadership of Paul Croce as our chair. And we cannot forget, of course, Ron and Rita, who I've been in the planning and building circles in Rhode Island here for about 30 years. And I've got to tell you, Ron and Rita are 2 of the best. So we are very fortunate to have both Ron and Rita working for the town and guiding us on our work. So thank you to both of them, and thank you to Paul for guiding us.
Billy, when I saw the picture, I said, well, who's that on the bottom? Because you're on the bottom of the screen. I said, it's Bill Nash. I said, that picture's got to be 25, 30 years old, you know?
No. That's about a year old. And, I'm not typically shy about showing my video, but when I'm going 65 miles an hour down the highway, I'm going to be more cautious than I am being. So thank you for having me, though, Paul.
Thank you for joining, Billy, and please drive safe.
Thanks.
Should I go next?
Sure.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, Mike Fenton. I've been on the planning board now for 1.5 years. I'm currently acting as the secretary of the planning board, and I've served on some subcommittees in dealing with the airport overlay ordinance and the build-out ordinance. I mean, the build-out analysis. So glad to meet you all.
Welcome, Mike.
Hi, I'm Art Weber. I've been on the planning board since 1998, except for an exciting 2 years up in your seats on the council, which was very, very positive. I've helped build 2 comprehensive plans for the town and numerous meetings and subcommittees over the years. And I really am happy about the planning board. I think we have a good team, and I think we're providing the greatest advisory opinions available to any town in the state.
Thank you, Art.
Go ahead, John. You're muted.
John, I believe you're muted.
All right. This is John Schumo. This is my 5th year on the planning board, and it's been a privilege to be on the planning board and to work with Paul, who really is a tremendous leader, keeps us focused and allows everyone in this collegial group to have its say. And it's also been a privilege to work for the town of Middletown to further improve our lifestyle in the town of Middletown. Thank you.
Thank you, John. As my son would say, Mr. C.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
BJ,
Yep.
You're muted.
muted.
BJ, you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, BJ Owen, I've been on the planning board about 10 years, and I think I'm probably considered the environmentalist on the planning board. Many years ago, Art Weber designated me as the tree hugger. So I think that we have a wonderful group on this board, and I am very concerned about the direction of this town, having been brought up in this town, having gone to all the schools in this town. And it has been a wonderful place to live. And I hope that I can contribute to make it as good as I have known.
Thank you, BJ. Joe?
You're welcome.
Great, Joe Pyrrhic. I think along with Mike, I'm one of the rookies on this wonderful team that I get to be involved with. Very grateful for Paul, Ron, and Rita's leadership. And I've been lucky enough to work on some of the subcommittees, airport and the build out, working closely with my other planning board members on that. And again, very grateful to have this opportunity to try to make things better in our community for our residents and Aquidneck Island as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Ron, you're all set? Okay. So let's move forward, guys, again, and ladies. This evening's really just a joint meeting with the planning board in regarding the comprehensive plan implementation priorities, zoning, and full build impact study and matters related thereto. So I'm going to read number 1 in, and then we'll get started. Okay. Number 1 is communication of Ron Wolanski, town planner, and Paul Croce, planning board chairman, in reference to comprehensive plan zoning implementation status report.
Motion to receive said communication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so does everybody have in front of them the if you want to start, Paul, I don't know if you want to start with or Ron, whoever wants to take it. And you know, we have there is items that are prioritized. Do you want to take them one at a time and speak to them? And then you know, after you speak to them, the council, we can all discuss it, all of us, planning and council, and figure out, because your input's as valuable as ours. You're the folks that do this. And then we can figure out a priority list from there, and then we'll move on to number 2 about the build out. Okay? Fair enough?
Good.
Okay,
Ron,
so
I think it
Ron,
would be best, Ron, if you gave a brief introduction to each of these, and then we can open it up for discussion.
Sure, that's fine. I'll just maybe cruise very quickly through the memo, just indicating the status of each of these items. And these are items that go back to the comprehensive plan adopted in 2015. And back at that time, the planning board met with the town council and identified some higher priority items to be worked on first, and then some remaining zoning related items that weren't necessarily prioritized in this memo. So the first item, zoning map consistency. As you know, we've been working diligently between amendments to the zoning map and the comprehensive plan future land use map to bring consistency between those 2 maps. In terms of current status, as we all know, there was some concerns raised about the most recent proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan map, and those amendments have been referred back for additional review and consideration by the planning board, and the board is aware of that. And the board has instructed me to schedule a public workshop or public hearing, I guess, to reconsider some of the amendments that were being proposed. So that'll be moving forward pretty quickly. Bulk zoning, this goes back several years where there was some concerns raised about the size of homes being built in certain parts of town. And back in 2018, amendments were brought forward to the town council. And at that time, the town council chose not to proceed with the adoption of any restrictions. And so there's no further action proposed at this time regarding that issue. Regarding affordable housing and particularly inclusionary zoning, that's been looked at a couple of times over the past few years, and the planning board has now again decided that it will, I guess, reevaluate particularly inclusionary zoning as a potential tool to bring more affordable housing to town. And of course, with all the discussion recently about the need for affordable housing, and it's not just subsidized housing we're talking about, it's market rate, family housing, mid-range, workforce housing, whatever terminology you want to use. We all understand that there's a need to address this issue in Middletown and on Aquidneck Island. So the planning board will be taking up, in addition to the inclusionary housing zoning, there are other recommendations in the comprehensive plan relative to affordable housing. And I provided a memo summarizing these for the planning board at their last meeting, and they're interested in getting moving on some of that work. And they're actually, I believe, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the discussion was at the last planning board meeting to await resolution of the town council's efforts at creating an affordable housing committee to ensure that there's no duplication of effort. So I think the idea was that once the town council has its committee up and running, there would be an opportunity to communicate, have both committees communicate and work, at the same time on these issues. Number 4 on the list, mixed use development and big box retail. So this is one that the town has addressed. A mixed use ordinance was adopted. Restrictions on big box development were adopted several years ago. The only thing I guess left outstanding is there's always an opportunity for potential amendments to ordinances once they're in place and we identify concerns or areas where they might not be working as well as we thought they would, and opportunities to make some adjustments. So I think that's sort of an ongoing conversation with the mixed use ordinance, trying to make sure that it works well for the town. Number 5, agricultural zoning overlay. This is an effort that took place a few years ago to draft an overlay district that would allow for additional ancillary uses on agricultural and farmland. That ordinance was brought forward to the town council, but the town council at that time decided not to adopt it. So there's no further work proposed on that issue at this time. Preservation of historic buildings, number 6. The planning board has drafted a proposed program to provide some financial incentives to property owners to preserve and improve historic homes in town, historic buildings generally. That was brought forward, I believe it was just as or just before COVID hit. Concern was raised that maybe the timing wasn't the best to talk about this particular issue, but we anticipate bringing this forward again to the town council in the near future. It's an item I know of interest to several town council members and of course planning board members. Number 7, limiting light pollution. This proposed zoning ordinance amendment is actually on your docket for Monday night for the first reading and public hearing. So that's coming before you right away. Number 8, transportation options. As with some of these, there are a lot of ongoing work. So even though we're adopting and proposing certain items towards these goals, there's always opportunity to do more. So what's happened so far on this particular topic is the planning board proposed and the town council approved adoption of a requirement that on land development projects that bike racks be installed as part of any new development to encourage the use of bicycles as an alternative form of transportation. So that's one small way of addressing transportation options. But, as I just said, there's always opportunities to do more. So we'll be continuing to look at that issue. Promoting low impact smart growth development. That, again, this is another ongoing issue. This is, you could argue that almost anything we do in terms of proposing amendments to regulations and zoning ordinances is really towards this goal of doing smart development in town. Obviously, nobody wants to do dumb development. So anything we do is hopefully getting us moving in the right direction. Number 10, airport zoning. So this is a topic of high interest at the moment because the town, the planning board just held a public workshop a couple of weeks ago. We notified abutters to the airport who would be impacted by a proposed overlay zoning district. We got some good input during that public workshop session. Some concerns were raised not only by the public, but also members of the planning board about whether what we drafted at this point is moving in the right direction. So at the conclusion of that public workshop, the board decided to refer the matter back to the subcommittee, which Joe Parrott happens to chair, and we'll be doing some additional work. One of the first items that I'm working on trying to get set up is a meeting, hopefully a tour of the facility by RIACT, so that the board members have a good understanding of the layout of the airport, how the airport operates, and to get, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, the concerns of airport officials as to what they feel the town could be helping them with. And of course, we'll be working to revise the draft and having more public meetings and whatnot. But at this point, it won't be coming before the town council in the near future. And then last, I think on this list is number 11, Rural Village District. This was an idea, again, out of the comp plan to create a new sort of business area, recognizing the development that's occurred along East Main Road in the area of Shaw's Nurseries, the winery, and also now the condos or the lodging facility, East Island Reserve, Prospicio's Place. So the idea in the comp plan was to recognize the development that's occurred in that area, perhaps designated it as a special business district. And, the terminology was a rural business district. We did have a subcommittee of the planning board did have several meetings with the affected property owners. And it became clear after trying to schedule the meetings and get folks together and then actually meeting that there was a limited amount of interest among the affected property owners to provide any revised zoning ordinance or any revisions to the regulations. So due to that lack of interest on the part of the affected property owners, the board decided that it would be best to table this issue for the time being. And of course, bring it back at an appropriate time if there is interest that's expressed at some point in the future. So that's a quick summary of that list. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or planning board members can chime in.
Does any councils have any questions or comments about Ron's overview? Council Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good evening, everybody from the planning board and town councilors. Thank you, Ron, for running through that very quickly. I have a question since we're looking at prioritizing tonight. The zoning map consistency, I know that that's just about done. This is the last section. Did I read that right, of the FLUP map? Nice
That's
job.
right. This is the last group of amendments. And of course, we get kind of stuck at the last one, but that's fine. We're going to do the right thing and go back and revisit. So that's not a problem. But yes, this is the last group.
And is this a mandate by the state, the consistency? Not that we have to do what's in the comprehensive plan or do what's in our zoning, but that they match. Does the state mandate that action? So that has to have a priority, or is that not a mandate by the state?
It is a mandate. It's within the Comprehensive Planning Act, and I don't have the citation or the exact language, but basically it says that the town's comprehensive plan and zoning zoning regulations and zoning map need to be consistent, and in the town, that towns need to make that effort to bring consistency between those two documents.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that so we know where that goes. That sort of has to be at the top then, I guess. And you're working on it. And when I looked through the list, I took your memo of the 25th, which was attached, the memo of the 31st, and Mr. Brown's update of the 31st, and made an entire list of what the planning board has done and all those items that work completed, planning board work completed. It's really staggering to look back and see what you've done. I have one other question on your meeting on the 14th. I don't know if you if you have an update on the solar arrays, the ground mounted solar arrays, or the land use table review subcommittee.
Solar arrays was voted. The planning board voted to send that forward to the town council, so that will be coming to you. I don't think it'll be on Monday's docket, but probably the next one to be ordered advertised. And then what was the second one?
The land use table review, section 602 in zoning. The question that came up at our meeting on the 5th was they had stopped meeting, the subcommittee had stopped meeting, and that was going to be potentially discussed by the planning board.
That was discussed, and I think it's still, I don't know if Bill's able to chime in at this point, but I think the idea was to still wait until public meetings are possible.
Yeah, Ron, so I'm here, and yeah, so actually, Terry, was for the, wasn't land use, it was the, well, I guess it was land use, but it was
the use table.
The use table out of the zoning ordinance. And,
Yep.
and you know, from the beginning, if you go back to when you were on the board, certainly years ago, I mean, this ordinance and the use table was, in my eyes, was one of the most efficient parts of our ordinance, and I volunteered to sub-chair that, which I'm glad to do and glad to work forward. You know, COVID came. We had just completed one of our tasks. We have several tasks, and we kept getting sidetracked on really the main task, but that was fine. That's the work that we do, and you know, I'm glad to continue doing that. I've asked Ron to put together a synopsis of, you know, where we are and what our charge is going forward. We had some discussion on that at the last meeting, and we've all kind of, well, I'll speak for myself. I've forgotten some of the work that we've done meeting virtually, and you know, meeting virtually is not the ideal situation. Frankly, I spend an awful lot of time on Zoom and video calls, and I've about had it. So I'm glad that I'm traveling again and seeing people for real in person, and I'm hoping that we're able to do that in the near future with our subcommittees and the full planning board. But I've asked Ron to put together a summary of where we're at and just kind of give us an update of where we are. And then, you know, I'm assuming by the next planning board meeting, we'll be able to schedule maybe a social distancing in-person meeting. But if not, then we'll probably do Zoom. But I'd like to move it along and get back to some in-person, face-to-face discussions. We just seem to get so much more done when we're in person. I think we all can agree on that at this point, but we have to be safe, and the protocols are there for a reason. But I think we all prefer to work in person, but we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do remember when you and I and Mr. Williams were on that committee, Bill,
Sure.
and got that started, and how much we did get done. And I know there's an awful lot sitting on the shelf, and I think I agree with you that that's the part of the zoning code that really protects our town. And, you know, that's really on my radar because of that. And because, as you said, it's been a long time since that was reviewed, and you've been saying that now for at least 3 or 4 years.
Right. You know, I'm committed to doing it. I think we all are. Things are breaking now, so fingers crossed we'll have a subcommittee meeting within the next couple of weeks for sure.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome.
Any other councils have any topic they want to talk about? Because I'd like to bring something up. As I look at the list, you know, some of the things, as Ron stated, were initially on the list, prioritized, have either fallen off or the council at the time didn't see as important or pressing. But one of the things that's not on the list that I'm going to ask Peter to talk about a little bit is is the marijuana issue. Because I think that, we need to stay ahead of this the best we can and be as informed as we can. Because, in some way, shape or form, at some point in time, it's coming. We just need to make sure we have things in place to be able to manage it. So I'm going to turn it over to the solicitor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So,
Pete. Peter.
yeah, thank you, Mr. President. The planning board did set up a subcommittee to review an amendment to the zoning ordinance dealing with marijuana-related uses. Spent a good deal of time on it. We brought in a consultant, Dwight Merriam, to assist us with that, and then eventually held workshops in front of the planning board and completed a draft ordinance that would attempt through the zoning code to regulate marijuana uses, from small scale cultivation to large scale cultivation, compassion centers, retail sales, if those are approved, as well as testing facilities. I would expect that the council would receive that for advertising and scheduling purposes at the second meeting in May, which I believe is on the 17th. Yes.
Wendy.
We've got to talk in the microphone.
Yeah. In any event, so I would
think June, the first one in June, because we need 3 weeks to advertise.
Yes. Well, what I was saying is you would be receiving that for advertisement and notice and scheduling at the second meeting in May.
Okay.
And at that point in time, the hearings would be scheduled on that, which would probably take place sometime in June. And I think at that point, we'll also hopefully have a better sense of the legislation that is currently moving through the General Assembly. And one of the key issues there is in what manner the town can prohibit or opt out of certain types of uses. I know that the League of Cities and Towns is pushing for that to be able to be done at the town council level, whereas the current legislation that I believe is being promoted by the governor's office would require a special election for that to happen, for an opt-out to happen. Otherwise, all of those uses would be permitted. But in any event, there'll be an opportunity for the town coming up shortly to review all that work by the planning board. And they did put an extensive amount of time in and came up with what I think is probably would be, if it's adopted, would probably be the best ordinance in the state at this point in time.
Really?
In terms of its depth. So
That's great. Paul, do you guys have any comments on that particular ordinance? Or maybe you can educate us a little more on the proposed draft or?
Well, I don't know how much detail you want to go into. I guess we were tasked with looking at cultivation on a mass scale, sales outlets, and testing facilities. And in the end, the draft is written such that retail outlets are not allowed. Cultivation centers, large-scale cultivation centers are allowed only in industrial areas. And the way the setback distances were set, there is one area in the north of Middletown that allows that to be located there. And the testing facilities, which are like a laboratory, would be allowed in the industrial park. And that's a very quick summary of what's in the ordinance.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Peter. So does anybody have any recommendations? I just kind of want to get a feel. I think maybe the whole council wants to get a feel for what the planning board thinks are the most important issues. It's not just one-sided. We certainly don't want it to be that. We're going to have our own opinions, obviously, but we need to work on this as a group. As I look at the list, or maybe there's something that's not on the list that you may want on the list, or may think it's important that we need to discuss. Paul.
Let me jump in, Paul, if I may.
Okay.
There were some things that are not on either of these two lists that planning board feels are important. One of them is the Atlantic Beach District overlay. We finished our work on that a while ago. And we felt it was important to move along because as new applicants come in with their plans, we would like the requirements of the overlay to be in place. So if you could give that some attention to move that along, that would be appreciated.
Okay,
Another one is the Connington West Main Road development. We are simply seeking some feedback on how you wish to proceed with that, or how you, if you want us to get involved, or exactly what you want to do. We've already discussed the use table and the marijuana ordinances. And another thing we're seeking feedback on is the mixed use ordinance. We passed the ordinance a while ago. We sent some amendments up, which we thought would make it better. The town council rejected those amendments, but we would like to get some feedback on why they were rejected so that we can remedy that and put forth some amendments that the town council is agreeable with to get that mixed use ordinance going and in use. And I guess that's what I have on my list right now.
okay. Does any other planning board members have anything else, Art?
Yes, I'd like to reinforce what Paul said, and I'd like to talk about the process of the products that are being provided to the council. I have a long-range one, which nothing ever happened to, and I want to give you an actual timeline on Atlantic Beach Master District, because it gives you an indication of how long it takes things to do. The comp plan, which was approved in 2015, has a provision in there for a wastewater management plan. So the planning board went through this whole process with the public hearing and forwarded a memo to the town council on May 10th, 2018. For a proposed on-site wastewater management plan. I don't think it's ever seen the light of day or been considered. And I think that's important, and something needs to happen there. But I want to read you the timeline of what Paul just talked about, because I think when we get these products done, we'd like to get them moved quickly so they're on the books and effective. So I'm going to read this quickly. Bear with me. Back in February 4th, 2019, the council and planning board held a joint meeting where the council asked the planning board to start work on the ABD overlay. The planning board then formed 2 subcommittees and held 10 subcommittee meetings on the ABD overlay. That's Atlantic Beach Master District Plan. Then the full planning board held 2 public workshops on 31 July 2019, January 22, 2020. Finally, the planning board forwarded the attached positive recommendation to the town council on June 12th, 2020, which I find kind of remarkable what happened there. And now, 11 months later, it's just being advertised for consideration by the council. So, like everybody on the planning board, I can't speak for them, but we're a little frustrated that things need to move, in our opinion, along a little bit faster. And as you know, there was a little dilemma down in that particular district with the fence, which if that particular use table had been in effect, it would never have happened. So I just put that out as a way of maybe expediting things in a more in quicker fashion to get done. I have to tell you, I'm an impatient person. And once we get something done at the planning board, I want to get it to you and then get it done through your review process and get it on the books. So that's just a general comment I have.
Okay. Thank you, Art. I understand at, points and times, levels of frustration. I think we all understand that. But sometimes to expedite something, things need to make sure we, that they're vetted thoroughly and properly. And, sometimes that takes time, but I understand some of the examples you set. One of the things that that Paul talked to me about yesterday was, and I think, anytime we can improve our lines of communication, say, for example, you guys put the mixed use ordinance before us, we reject it, and you don't get a reason why we reject it. I think we need to do better at giving reasons back to you and feedback back to you as you do to us, saying why. And then maybe there's a reason that, maybe you can look at it again and say, okay, it needs to be tweaked here, tweaked there, or whatever the reasons were, that we come to a compromise and we move forward or we don't. And I think that's important. So there's a gap that certainly I wasn't aware of, but I think that's been addressed between today and yesterday. Okay.
All right, can I follow up with one other thing?
Sure.
In the past 18 months, two development plan review projects, one, the gas station at the corner of East Main and Aquidneck, and a land project on Prospect by Mr. Goldstein, both were not approved by the planning board and were approved by the zoning board. Both had merit for not being considered, and we, again, haven't gotten much feedback from the zoning board, but I personally, and I think everybody else that voted against these, had a reasonable argument supported by both problems with the comp plan and our ordinances. And I'm just concerned, we have other major league projects coming up right now, and it's frustrating, like everything else, when somebody says no to you. I mean, it started out as when I was a kid, but I don't know. I'm a little concerned that generally we don't have our projects that we approved by the zoning board. And I just put that out there because I was hoping somebody on the council would be curious enough to say, maybe there's something going on here, maybe there's something wrong, maybe we need to look at this. So, but I think that relationship between what happens at the planning board, obviously, and the zoning board is important. It's important for the applicant, and it's important for the town and everybody that lives here.
Okay.
Here, here.
Thank you, Art. Okay. You know, maybe at some point, sorry, Mrs. Von Villas.
Well, first of all, I want to second what you said just a few minutes ago, because I think that's vitally important. One of the things that we do at the town council level is that we talk and talk and talk as a group, but we don't develop our conclusions at the end so that we, for example, could give a list of the specific issues that are reasons that we are turning something down, for example. So when it goes back to the planning board, what happens is that, different people heard different things and they're not quite sure how to address what it is specifically that the objections were for at the town council level. So I think that is very important. The other thing that I do want to say is I had occasion for a very unrelated reason to go over all of the minutes from the planning board going all the way back to 2008. And quite frankly, I think you guys do an amazing job, because not only do you have your regular meetings, but you actually have special meetings frequently so that you can address very specific items. So you are doing what you need to be doing very effectively. The problem is it comes to us, and for one reason or another, it just seems to fall flat up here, and we don't communicate back with you. So I want to second what Paul has said. I think it's vitally important for us to communicate data, specifics, not generalizations, not a lot of conversation, but itemized things of what exactly the issues are, so that you guys can go forward, come back to us with something that we're going to accept, and we can move on. Because quite frankly, I'm very sympathetic with you with the fact that everything seems to die up here.
I had to shut it down. She's getting very passionate. I'm just kidding.
Yay.
Councilor Flynn.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I'm never quite sure if I'm being seen between the two venues going on simultaneously. So I would also like to thank Mr. Weber for actually verbalizing what a lot of us have always thought about in the dynamics of moving things along and helping to protect our town. And I actually, although they may not be listed in a bullet pointed, clear, this is why the town council has made a certain decision. I think in our conversations, I at least always try to get why I'm voting out on the table so it's clear to the public. So it is, we are recorded. I think those reasons are there. If we need to make it a little bit more clear in the minutes, I think that's something maybe we need to consider, because I do think it's important for us all to be efficient and effective. On the zoning board approving items that the planning board has denied, that is a real eyebrow raiser, and it hasn't just happened recently.
Mhm.
And I believe, and I think the solicitor can confirm or clarify this, that I think it's part of state law, if the zoning board is going to approve something that the planning board has denied, I think they have to, or they're required to give very detailed reasons as to why. Could I ask the solicitor to weigh in on that, just so to clarify it for all of us?
Sure, Peter?
Yeah, so there's two situations. There are times when the zoning board is the actual permitting authority for a particular project, and other boards such as the planning board or conservation commission may give an advisory opinion. And I would say that most of the time those advisory opinions are followed by the zoning board. There are certain times when they have not been. And in those situations, the zoning board provides a rationale or reasoning why they're doing something different than what the planning board suggested. I think the overwhelming majority of the time they follow those recommendations. There are also times when the planning board is the permitting authority, let's say for a subdivision or land development project. And if a project is either approved or denied, whoever is unhappy with that decision, whether it's the applicant or an abutter, has the ability to appeal that decision to the zoning board. So the zoning board essentially sits as a planning board of appeals, and then the next appeal is up to the Superior Court. So there have been situations. There was one recently where the planning board made a decision. The applicant appealed that to the zoning board. The zoning board sustained the appeal. In other words, they reversed the planning board decision. In that case, the zoning board laid out the rationale and reasons for that. And I'm not going to get into the particulars of that case because that may also be further appealed. But it does happen, and it's provided for in the state law that who's ever unhappy with the decision that the planning board makes, they've got a right to appeal it, just as someone who's unhappy with the decision of the zoning board has a right to appeal that to the Superior Court. And if the Superior Court overturns the zoning board decision, they likewise have to provide a rationale and reason for that. So it doesn't happen very often, but obviously when it does happen, people take notice.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, when the planning board sends a recommendation to the council and we don't act on it or we don't approve it, I think it's appropriate we give back proper comment as to why. And then again, maybe it could be tweaked, maybe it can't be tweaked, but sometimes that's why there's a process. And that's why there's checks and balances along those processes, and whether we agree or we feel strongly about something or passionate against it. Again, that's why the process is there. And, you guys are volunteers and they're volunteers, and, we have to trust our volunteers and listen to our volunteers. And sometimes we're going to agree and sometimes we're going to disagree. So, Councilor Toronto.
Thank you. Who's responsible for that? I know we have conversation, like when the issue came up and we went through the proposed changes and everyone made a comment. And for example, they didn't like the idea of the hours, or they didn't like something about it. And we talk about it, we discuss it. Who's responsible to take those bullets or those notes and share it with the planning board, for example, or the zoning board?
Sean, you want to answer that, or you want me to?
You can.
Okay, so Dennis, good question. I did have conversation this week, yesterday, actually, when I spoke to Paul about that, and he brought that issue up, and the gaps that are there that we need to minimize. And I'd spoken to Wendy, and then I'd spoken to Ron, and Ron's gonna take that lead and make sure that happens.
Okay, so that Ron will be at, when that comes forward to us, we're discussing it, he'll take the minutes for that, or go back and review the video and write down kind of our concerns. Then however we move that forward, it's fine. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, okay. All right, so,
Oh, Mr. President?
yes, Councilor Flynn.
Yeah, I wasn't quite done when I asked for the solicitor's input. Sorry, I had one more. But
Oh,
I did
sorry.
see, that's okay. I did see Mr. Croce put his hand up and I didn't want to proceed if there was input that he would like to make.
I was just wondering that, would it be appropriate when the zoning board makes a ruling that goes against the planning board, could they send a document back to the planning board with their rationale? That would be helpful, I think.
I'm gonna refer to the solicitor.
Well,
Well,
there
there-
is, I do believe there is a provision that if the planning board, if the zoning board does not accept the planning board's opinion or advisory opinion and does something different, that they are required to state the reasons for that, and those would typically be included in the decision of the zoning board. So, certainly we could talk to the zoning officer, and in those cases where that happens, see that a copy of that decision goes to the planner, so that communication, at least what's laid out in the written decision on that issue is brought to your attention.
We do sometimes get copies of the zoning board decision. They don't put a lot of detail in there, Peter.
Okay.
I guess suppose at the next planning board meeting after that happens, you could ask me and I'll tell you what happened and what the rationale was. But I mean, there is a requirement that if they're going to go a different way than what the planning board's advisory opinion is, that be laid out in the zoning decisions.
I'm just thinking that as a protocol courtesy, since they're acting against something that we acted on, it would be worth, a brief memo coming back to the planning board.
Hey, Paul.
Dennis, is that, I'm trying to see who's, Dennis, go ahead.
Okay, no, those are good points, and it's kind of a communication both ways. I mean, zoning needs to understand why planning made the decision they made. And, so do they watch the video? Do they know why planning said no? And then they get it, and then they're making decisions, based on what's being put in front of them by the lawyers.
True.
And is it like a different message that they're getting at zoning than they got at planning? Or, where's the misconnect between our planning board and our zoning board? And
Well-
so, and it could be legal. I mean, the zoning always tells me that they make decisions based on the ordinance. And that's what they tell me. So it's supposedly legal and by the law. The lawyers are like, this is how it's supposed to happen, as long as you do all the steps that you're supposed to do. So to me, the planning says one thing and zoning doesn't agree with that. It's almost like maybe we should find a way of not passing it yet until zoning has a sign off with planning. I don't want to start a fight between the two, boards, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that planning says no and zoning says yes.
Peter,
Yeah. Well,
hang on 1 second. Let the solicitor explain.
Yeah, so not to get too deeply into it, but that there are processes that are laid out in the state law and in the ordinances. The zoning, presentations on projects are made before the planning board, and then that same project is presented again to the zoning board. The zoning board members receive a copy of the planning board's advisory opinion, and that's part of the record on which they make their decision.
Correct.
But they don't watch the zoning board hearings because they're required to make their decision based on the evidence that is presented to them during the zoning board hearings. The transcripts or videos of the planning board hearings are not part of the record in front of the zoning board. It's the written advisory opinion is. So there are times when, projects sometimes get altered between the time they're at the planning board and they get to the zoning board. Sometimes there are concessions made, things are made smaller, things are made shorter that may make the zoning board more amenable to approving them. And those might be changes that were not part of the project when they were in front of the planning board. Sometimes the boards just have a different opinion of what's allowable under the ordinances and under the law.
Can I just respond to that, please?
Sure.
Understand, again, government. this is the process you go through. You go to 1. If you don't like that, you go to 2. If you don't like that, you go to 3. And hopefully by the time you get to 3 or 4, you get approval. So I don't necessarily agree with the process. And so I'm just saying things change. You're right. So now planning gets one presentation and then it changes by the time it gets to zoning. Zoning overrides planning. And then if they don't like what planning does, they take it to the state level. If they don't like that, then to me, it's just, if that's too complex. I mean, that just is like, to me, a bad system. So that's just my opinion.
Unfortunately, that's the system that we have, and that's dictated by state law.
Okay. Terry, were you finished?
I was not, but did Mr. Nash want to jump in on?
No, I think I'd like you to finish first, please.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to address Councillor Von Villas's comment about things falling flat at the town council level. And, I also agree with Mr. Weber about getting things from the planning board to the town council so they can get put in place to protect the town. And I'm wondering, throw it out there maybe for further thought, if instead of the planning board taking their time and having their public hearings on things that they have outlined, that I wonder if a sort of a conceptual meeting with the town council and planning board should happen first. And if they're going down a path that, we would like to input on or redirect before we have, all their time is taken on the public hearings, that it sort of goes through a filter first so that, then when it goes out to the public, it's already sort of been screened by us, and then it's probably going to go through with a more defined constitution. Just a thought.
Yeah, one of the things I certainly don't want to do is, just me personally, is getting into micromanaging what the planning board's tasks are or what they're working on. And I'm not saying that's what you're recommending, Terry.
No.
I just think it's important that let them do their work, let them do their subcommittee work, let us stay out of it. If they need something from us, I think they can always certainly come to us and ask, hey, is this what, and this what you guys think, is, are we traveling down the right road or not? So I'm very cautious about, and I hate the word interfere. Let them do their work, and if they have any questions, I'm sure that they'll come to us, or Ron will get with Sean, and Sean will bring it to us one way or another. Paul?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think it's good to get public input before we go to the town council.
Yep, no doubt about it. So I would like to, Councilor Welch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just listening to everybody, I think Terry's onto it in a sense, but I certainly agree we shouldn't be micromanaging the planning board. But I think the problem here is that when we get it, we have docket information and we have a short period of time to try to understand it. And the only time that we can talk is like right now at a meeting. So if there are questions that we have or things that we don't like, it is just inherent in the system. Then it has to go back to the planning board, and they can either, do something like this, where if it's a big issue, we can then talk about it and understand their position better. But I do see the problem. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know, but that's where the problem lies.
I think a good start could be like we've been talking about earlier, some better communication as to why it's rejected, whether it's us or whether it's Peter. Maybe from the zoning. If that happens, it gets passed along to planning. Once the decision's made, it's made. But for future decisions, it can certainly be tweaked if there's an issue. So I think that's a good start. One thing I certainly don't like, or I don't think any of us would like, is, one board pitted against the other. And I'm not saying that's the case, but I kind of get a little sense of the frustration. We're all working together, and hopefully we can improve streamline some of the communication and some of the rationale behind some of the decisions. And I think that would certainly be helpful. So, Mrs. Santos.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excuse me. certain items have been presented to the council tonight from the planning board. And I'm wondering if I were to have questions regarding certain items, who is the best person to go and talk about these as a council person with questions?
Okay, so my recommendation would be several. My first person I would go to would be go to Sean. He'll either get the answers from Ron or he'll direct it to Ron. One of the two. That would be up to Sean, or you can certainly reach out to the solicitor. He's usually up to speed on these things. Well, at least I hope he is. And well, I know he is. And that'll just be avenues that I would travel.
Well, let me ask you, say this, Mr. Brown has so much on his plate. We're adding more, we're having council people either calling him or emailing him constantly, email after email. Why can we not go either to the planning board, go to Paul, or go to Ron?
Listen, as far as I'm aware, as long as I know, as much as I know, is that I don't think there's anything wrong with picking up the phone if you want to have a conversation or get more educated on an issue. If you have develop a relationship with Ron or with Paul or whoever, but I would certainly probably guide you more towards Ron Molansky or Sean Brown, so that there's, say an issue goes awry and a planning board member gets upset with a council member and saying, hey, they were interfering with you or whatever. I would stick down the path of the administrator.
Administration.
Yeah.
I would, and quite honestly, I worked with Ron for a very long time, and as pointed out tonight, he's extremely competent. I wouldn't hesitate to connect you with Ron. The other resources, the solicitor, who's very much part of advising the planning board.
Yeah.
Okay. There are a lot of opportunities to ask questions, and I think and even the planning board members, all very easy to work with, and I think more than willing to share information.
I know in the past when I had so many questions of the tax assessor, and I was told that I could go talk to him personally, other than taking up the time of the council meeting. And you were the one who told me that, so I abided by your wishes.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
Ron is extremely competent, and
Okay.
I wouldn't hesitate for a second directing you to him.
Okay. So, good conversation. We are now an hour into this, and I think it's might be appropriate, unless somebody has some other thoughts, to start getting a feel for how we want to prioritize this list. I think my own personal opinion is I'd like to hear from the planning board on what they think, and then certainly we'll kick it around and see where it goes.
I'll be happy to start the comments if you want.
Yes, sir.
Look at this list, and the zoning map consistency is being addressed and essentially done. I would put the top item as affordable housing, which has both the town council and the planning board feel are top priority items. We will be taking care of some amendments to mixed use once we get some feedback to you, but that's a relatively small item. Preservation of historic resources is essentially done and coming to you. Transportation options, the first piece is done, as Ron said, and more is being done. Airport zoning, that could be critical. I think it depends on how things go with our subcommittee and what they find out as they work with it. So for me, the top priority item should be affordable housing, followed maybe by airport zoning and the mixed use amendments.
Okay. Is any other planning board members, and I hate to put you on the spot, do you see it any differently, or you guys all in sync and ladies in sync, or maybe someone might say, hey, because I certainly know council people will say, no, I think this should be, or we don't always agree on that. So it's important that we all speak our minds and we figure this out.
Well, I would just offer that the development of the corridor of the Navy property that we purchased some years ago being developed commercially, that really needs to be investigated and solved, because I think it's going to be an economic engine which we're going to need in the future. And I'm very strong on taking a good look at that. I think we have the plan that Mr. Bisho put forth seemed to cover a lot of bases, and it also touched on a couple of things. If the mixed use ordinance is fully solved, that's good. But when I hear talk about possible affordable housing, you know, it lets us do 3 or 4 things at once: commercial development, mixed use, and affordable housing. I say that's a home run. And I'd really like us to get expediting that process, at least to look at it and explore it a little bit more.
Okay, Art, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that as I look at the docket that's prepared for us, that's sitting in front of us for Monday's meeting, I believe that Councilor Von Villas and the Vice President have something on there for Connington to take a second look at this, okay? But I agree with you on that. Mr. Croce.
Yeah, when I made my comments, I was looking at this list, but I should have added the Atlantic Beach District overlay. That should be a high priority item also.
Okay. Any other councils have any, or Vice President?
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the planning board's input, and rather than try to prioritize all of these items,
Okay.
I don't see the point. I think Mr. Croce picking out the top ones was very helpful, and I agree with all of them. And I also agree with you that after we talk about West Main Road and can get a little more clarification where the council wants to go, then the planning board can be, you know, more helpful along the way. So personally, I like Paul's suggestions, and the other ones can fit in as they see fit.
Okay. Does any other councilors have any, Mrs. Santos?
Thank you, Mr. President. If the secretary, Mr. Fenton, if he could email me what the chairman of the planning board prioritized, I had a tough time hearing him. So if he could email the council, I don't know if the rest of the council heard him, but there are times that I could not hear him. If the secretary for the planning board could email the recommendations of the chairman in order.
I'll do it, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fenton.
I just want to recap, and Terry and Dennis, I'm going to turn to you in a second, Mrs. Von Villas, but I think I heard affordable housing. I heard and I heard Atlantic Beach District, Connington Highway, and the airport overlay. Council Von Villas.
When I look at the needs, I always look at what has the largest impact. And it would seem to me that included in one of the absolute major areas is a stormwater utility that we've been talking about for years and years and years, and has a huge impact. The issues of water are huge in terms of the east side. So I think that has a huge impact across the town, and we've got to address that.
Okay. Dennis.
Yes, thanks. We kind of set priorities too as the council, just so the planning board. I want to thank everyone on the planning board. Thank you for coming tonight and doing this. This is, I think it's really important that we meet quarterly. That's just my thought, you know, that we just have this type of meeting, because I think it opens up communications. I'm hoping we get to do it with zoning as well, to talk with them a little bit, you know, what their thoughts are. Those really two very important committees, you know, for the town. So, you know, I like the priorities that I just heard on your side. We do have priorities on the council side. When we were, Bob asked us when, you know, as part of the challenge that we took at the beginning of the year was to come up with what the council felt like they could all get aboard on and get things done. So, you know, if everyone doesn't want something, then we're probably not going to get it done. But if everyone's kind of has this interest in getting something done, then we'll probably all get it done. So that's kind of what we're trying to get on the same page as, where do we want to invest our resources? What is taking a highest priority? With the schools, we want to talk about the children and how we're going to help them, and how we're going to help our small businesses get out of the virus. And so we have other things that are going on as well at the same time. So we can't add 6 things to the 7, 8 things that the council is going to focus on. We really need to turn to you folks and, and appreciate your all the work that you guys do, which we do. But when it does hit the town council, and I hate to say this, it does go into government speed in a lot of times. It just slows right down. And everyone said, well, so I agree. We got to prioritize, pick 2 or 3 that we should get done. The Atlantic Beach Overlay District has been something that's been focused on for 20 years. Just that area. We keep saying that's the entry to Middletown. And then next thing you know, we're talking about something over on the West Main Road. So let's just focus on getting something done and make some decisions and move forward. And then once we get that done, then we look at something else. But having 16 projects, we'll never get anything done.
That's part of the problem.
Dennis, you just got me fired up. And I agree. So, but some of the things that the planning board that Paul mentioned, and Art mentioned, some of those fall right in line, Dennis, as you mentioned, with the priorities that President Sylvia, when he was still here, that put in order. So as far as priorities, one of them was West Main Road, affordable housing, and I think, Art, you hit the nail right on the head. I think some of these may be able to be tied in together. You use the word home run, it could be a grand slam. And I agree with that. I think we have an opportunity in front of us potentially to get some of these done. But Dennis, to your point, I agree. I think we need to, if we put X amount, if we put 10 on the list, we'll probably get 1 done if we're lucky. If we focus on 2 or 3, put the right people in charge of those, put timelines on them, communicate effectively, I think we can get a lot done. So, and with some of these can be tied together. So, Mr. Croce?
Yes, I am sympathetic to the comment made by Councilor Von Villis. I did not mention water because that comes up under the second document that's on the agenda, the recommended priorities from the impact study. I was initially looking at the document, the first document on the agenda. That's why I did not mention water quality.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a few minutes, Paul, but I appreciate that. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. As I'm looking at, the list and the planning board work being finished, what have they finished doing? It really seems like a lot of this list has been completed, at least for right now. The planning board's work is done and it's been moved to the town council. I think I'm correct on that. It's going to be up to us, like with the Atlantic Beach District overlay. That's now, planning board's done, they've done their job for right now. Unless we kick it back, it's now our turn. Affordable housing, I think the advertisements are out for committee members. And we probably are going to need to re-advertise again. I think that a lot of people didn't get the word that we were looking to fill committees for that particular project. The airport zoning is, in progress. The mixed use, I think the list of why that got kicked back to you, that's, an action item on that one. So things are sort of past the planning board's action items, the solar arrays, being worked on, and so as I look at what's the planning board going to focus on, because a lot of things are already like they're winding down. And I'm thinking, with water, back to Mrs. Von Villis's point, this water traffic build out study, this is probably while everything else is moving towards the council for the planning board, I think this is one of the most important things to focus on. And along with that is the smart growth development ordinances, that uses table, maybe, the consideration of an R80 zone, bulk zoning, might need to be talked about. So, I think that with all the other things that are wrapping up, maybe this should really come to the surface and really get worked on hard by the planning board. That's my, vision.
Okay. So I just, Council Logan, do you have any thoughts or?
No, I think we're on the right path. I think everything that's been said so far is that we can put all this stuff on a list, but if we don't put hyper focus on one or two things, none of it's going to get done. Right. And I look at this list as a newbie coming into this, and I see opportunity to consolidate a couple of items into a couple of big ticket items to start to set a tone or pave a road for the future. So I fully agree with what's been prioritized. I think I have a different ranking structure on that, but I'm open to work with everybody to make sure that we get this thing done and get it done right so that we can actually get something accomplished.
Okay. So my thought coming into tonight was to prioritize it. The vice president sees it a little bit differently based on some of the conversation tonight. Just want to know what the pleasure of the council is. Anybody have any thoughts or what they'd like to see? Because I don't want to go away tonight. The worst thing can happen to go, well, we talked a lot, but we really didn't say what we were going to do. Well, Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the feeling that I get, I was more after a little clarification from the planning board as to what they saw as the priorities. And to Terry's point, and Mr. Weber, I think that a number of these projects, I don't see how we can go 1 through 5. Things have to happen, at different paces. So you're working on a number of things at once. Personally, I feel like what I think is important and the planning board think is important is on par. So whether 1 is 3 and 3 is 1, I don't have a problem with it. So I don't see the point in making it 1 through 5.
Okay. Does any of the councils have any different feelings from that, or any planning board members have any different feelings from that? No, I think we've identified the top 4 or 5 that we want to work on, and that would be just to be clear and to reiterate in no particular order: affordable housing, West Main, Connington, and again, those could be some that are tied in together. Atlantic Beach District, airport overlay, and we're going to talk about stormwater here in a few minutes. Is everybody okay at the end of this discussion with those items as being the top 5, we'll call them, that the town wants to work on, and not any particular order? Are we good with that? Vice President, you good with that?
Could you read them again, please, Mr. President?
Sure. They are affordable housing, West Main, Connington corridor development, Atlantic Beach District, airport overlay, and stormwater issues, which we're going to talk about here in a minute.
And I think opportunistically, we should probably include marijuana.
Okay.
As that ball's
And
moving at the.
and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Council Logan has brought up marijuana that we talked about earlier. So everyone okay with that?
Yes, on the marijuana. And could we put that uses table on this list?
We can. Sure. I just want to make sure that we focus on why don't we keep, and that's fine. We want to keep adding things. We got to be careful because we'll be in the same boat we were in before. And, hey, I don't mind being in that boat because I know it took some time, but as we went down this list, Terry, as you said, and as some of the planning board members have said, a lot of those things are coming to fruition. They took time to come to fruition, but they came to fruition. So, but again, I think if we focus on certain things, then we can certainly accomplish those. Is there any other feedback from any planning board members they'd like to make at this time in reference to anything we talked about on item number 1, or any other ideas that you have, maybe something we haven't mentioned? Okay. I'm going to turn it, Mr. Brown has a question.
Just a question. I believe Mr. Croce mentioned mixed-use development, some discussion with the council. I just wasn't sure what the disposition of that item was. Is that just something?
I think that yes, and I'm glad you brought that up, Sean. Sean's bringing up that Paul Croce had mentioned mixed-use development, and I'm glad you brought that up. Again, assumption on my part, it was just going to be tied in with West Main Road.
Okay.
So is everyone good with that? Anybody, any objections or any other conversation around that? Hey, you guys are easy. I like it.
Mr. President?
Yes.
You did
Councilor Flynn.
any comment on that? I think, was Ron going to dissect our reasons as to why that went back to the planning board? So that's clear from this last time?
Yes,
Okay.
I believe he is.
Thank you, Ron. Sorry.
Thank you, Ron. Okay, if everyone's good with that, everyone okay, moving on to item number 2. Okay. All right. Item number 2, communication of Paul Croce, planning board chair, in reference to full build impact study prioritized recommendations.
Motion to accept, to receive said communication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive said communication. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so Ron or Sean or Paul, whoever wants to take the lead on the build out with the ground surface water and the groundwater, that'd be fantastic.
I can go ahead and just give a quick intro to this. So you have the memo in front of you. The planning board went through an effort after receiving the report, and of course, the report and the recommendations was also presented to the town council. The board went through the effort to look at all of the recommendations with subcommittee work and then the full board, along with our consultant, Steve Cabral, who is on the line tonight in case there were any questions of him. He's available tonight as well. So what you have before you tonight is a prioritized listing of recommendations from the report in 3 broad categories: surface water, groundwater impacts, and then traffic. The board, and Paul can chime in as well, but I think the board was pretty clear that water issues are definitely the top concern, and that's already come out tonight with some of the discussion. And that traffic is certainly an issue as well, but the board felt that focusing on the 2 water topics should be the first effort. I'm not going to read through each of the recommendations. I'll just summarize that under surface water impacts, the 2 highest priority items that the board thought should be addressed. Number 1 would be for periodic water quality testing of water treatment systems. And I know that this has been talked about in different venues with the town council and others to confirm the efficacy of BMPs, best management practices, that we're having installed as part of our regulations that the town is also working to install. Number 2 on the surface water impact was establishing the stormwater utility and pursue additional retrofits of existing systems. I think Art referenced this earlier. This is something that's been talked about in the past by the town council as well. And then flipping over to groundwater, again, just the top couple high priority items: establish on-site wastewater management plan and ordinance. And again, this is another topic that has been talked about by the town council in the past. The planning board thought it was something that should be revisited. Number 2 on the groundwater list is evaluating financial and technical feasibility of water extensions to the east side of town. Again, another item that's been discussed before, but the planning board felt it's something that should be revisited as a way of addressing the ongoing concerns about water supply and water quality in certain parts of Middletown. And then again, the traffic, the I guess top item would be having a workshop with the police department, public works department, fire to address some of the particular improvements that are proposed in the study. There's some specific intersection and roadway improvements that are discussed and recommended in the study. And the thought was that having a workshop with the appropriate town officials would be the best first step on that item. So those are sort of the highlights, the top items in each category. Paul, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I'm good. It's a good summary, Ron.
Okay. So having said this, we've seen this in the past. We know we have some water issues, ones that we need to act on. For me, short-term ones with surface water and groundwater. I think testing is a great way to start to figure out, over the years, past few years, Sean and his team and along with the planning board have done a great job of implementing, some of the water quality, or trying to improve it by implementing, Sean, what do you call those things we did down the end of Greenan Avenue?
Gravel wetlands.
Yeah, the gravel wetlands. And I just think that one of the things we found out was that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that testing really wasn't really happening to figure out after that, whether it was actually functioning properly or not as to what it was designed to do. So I'm speaking as one, even though we're a team. Everyone has their own thoughts and opinions on it. I think testing is a great way to start. And then we need to continue to look at other areas of opportunities to improve water quality. One of the things, as most of you know or may not know, is that I think probably Sean, maybe 3 years ago, we put a survey out to the residents of the east side because this same issue came up with potentially extending water out there, and a septic program in place with testing, and people town actually testing, I believe, or somebody testing septic systems every so often. So when we did that, I'm pretty sure it was overwhelming that residents, some said no. Some said yes, but it was pretty overwhelming. I specifically, every time I see this, I can remember Mr. Murphy on the corner of Riverview and Wapping. Based on the frontage he has, the water would have cost him about $80,000 over 30 years to pay for. And that's just, to me, that's just not right. So I do think I like the direction of the planning board with the development that got approved over on Mitchell's Lane, as far as, putting, I believe, is it a cistern? Is that what it is? A cistern for safety issues, for water in case there's any fire and stuff like that. So, and this is just me speaking out loud. I would never support water on the east side. I'm one counselor, only for the fact that the more utilities you put out there, the less you can, I think for every utility to put out there, you can go down 10,000 square feet in zoning. So we always talk about the east side, the west side. They are what they are. They've developed the way they've developed over the years. I would never want to see the east side look like, as much as development. I don't want to say like the west side, because that's not fair, as developed as the west side. That's just me. So I don't know if any other council has any feelings toward this or not. Council Vice President Welch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pretty much in line with you, surprisingly. The testing of the surface water BMPs, I'm completely behind. I understand how they're supposed to work in theory. However, without testing the inflow and outflow, we don't really know. And if we're going to continue to use that type of structure, to address, more and more of the surface water, I think we should be sure that it's going to work before we continually spend money on it. So I'm all for that. I'm also not for charging people frontage. I am on the east side for stormwater, and also as far as the groundwater goes and sending city water out my way, I will never vote for that for a number of reasons, but one being that my father, it's one of my fatherisms. He always complained that the town, when they first built out, brought sewer and water into the town, obviously it was in the middle, and it was where businesses and the majority of the population lived, and that was a town-funded project. Once the majority of the town was done, that was the end of the town funding, and you are then on the hook to pay. So his position was, and I agree with him, that we paid the entire time everybody else got theirs, and now you're going to tell me I need to pay for me? I will never support that. And I agree. As you bring city water and or sewer into an area, we all know that DEM has the trump card when it comes to building. If they don't approve your septic plan, then you don't build a house. And when you take away a septic or the setback from a well, it opens up small and smaller lot sizes, more houses. We live over where we live, fully aware of the firefighting lack of water, and that we are living off a well and maintaining our septic system. But we made that choice, so I will never agree to have someone tell me to do it differently. Thank you.
Okay. Council Von Villas.
I hear what you guys are saying, those of you that live on the east side, and I certainly do appreciate where you're coming from. I would just suggest to you that in regard to anything that we do anywhere, that we be data-driven, not opinion-driven. That the most important thing is that we make our decisions based on factual collections of information and productive projections of what would happen if we do or don't do something, not based on opinion or whether somebody likes it or doesn't like it or what it's going to cost even. But the fact is, what is the data that drives our decisions? That's all I'm suggesting.
Okay. Paul or any members of the planning board, do you have any comments or?
Yes.
Sometimes we tend to have strong opinions, but that's okay. That doesn't mean that we're right, wrong, or indifferent. It's, we need to listen to everybody. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah. The reason we put this in as a high priority item was based on what we thought was good for Middletown. I understand there's a lot of public sentiment against this. I know it's been tried. With our second item, we really want not only to evaluate, but to explore other possibilities of making something like this happen. It's a significant water quality issue. It's also a safety issue. And because of that, I think we felt it was important to put this in as a recommendation because it's good for the town.
Yeah. I certainly respect that, Paul. We're probably going to see it, at least my opinion and your opinion, are going to be very different on this. And what I'm about to say, please, any member of the planning board or council, don't take it the wrong way. We're elected by the public, and as an elected official.
Hey, Tyler. Good. What's
you,
going on?
You want to.
Oh, okay.
Who's ever having that conversation, we can hear it. So having said that, it's, we're going to do what the constituents want us to do. And we went through a process of, actually asking those people on the east side, hey, look, we had all the data. We said we had the costs. maybe not exact cost, but Sean and his team did a really good job of getting costs out based on the formula that was being used. And majority of them, some of them said yes, but the majority of them flat out said no. So, you know, I'm not going to go against what the majority of the people actually want out there. So, and I understand, Paul, you bring up some good points, valid points. But I would never go against the will of the residents. That's for sure. So, Joe.
All right, thank you. And I certainly appreciate the input from the various members of the town council. I forgot to mention that I'm also the planning board's representative on the Conservation Commission, and water quality is something, and you know, preservation of wetlands is something we look at very, very carefully. I think it's important for the town council to know that pretty much every application that comes in front of us, and Paul, you can speak to it maybe even better than I, and Ron, you know, we're dealing with issues such as private drinking water, wells, septic, stormwater runoff, groundwater, and so forth. And, you know, as the guy who kind of led this task force on the full build out impact analysis, you know, we were given a tight time frame to get this done. We did put a tremendous amount of work in, and you guys have our recommendations. I hear what you're saying as it relates to extending water and so forth on the east side, and I'm intimately familiar with the east side of Middletown, and don't disagree with some of the comments you made. But I would hope that, you know, because of one issue, we don't kind of put this build out analysis study kind of to the back of the pile. I think it's super important. You know, we all know, you know, I think COVID has accelerated the demand, certainly on Aquidneck Island as a desirable place to live. I mean, the real estate market couldn't be any more white hot than it is today. I know we're going to be faced with probably more and more applications for development of land, subdivisions, et cetera. And we immerse ourselves in these issues on a consistent basis every month and in our subcommittee meetings. So I would hope that the town council will take a look, and if there's certain points you don't like, let's have a conversation about it. Appreciate the feedback you got. From my perspective, groundwater, surface water, traffic is kind of, you know, it's important, but it's definitely not the main priority item. And I think, you know, if we could look at, if you guys could focus on what we presented in that context, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Vice President Welch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So to that point, I agree. So my 2 cents would be on surface water impact, the high priority of testing the BMPs, I'm all for. The stormwater utility, I'm against. The groundwater, as far as the septic system goes, and I know there was talk a few years ago about having your septic system based on the volume of your tank and number of house or bedrooms. I forget what the criteria was, but they gave a suggested schedule as to when you were to have your tank pumped, and that the homeowner was to leave or to have that available. And I thought that at some point the town would require either you to provide that certificate, and or maybe the septic company would report back to the town, and there would be some oversight to make sure it was being done. I have no problem with that either. I think that's a great idea, and continuing to, you know, anytime there's a septic system that is failing, or during the process of selling a house or land, that it, you know, has to be inspected. All those are good things. So I'm fully behind those.
Okay. I can't remember the order of Art.
Yeah, one of the things I've been concerned about, not that we have an east and a west here, but for a long time, I've been concerned about getting a wastewater management plan for the east side of our town for several reasons. One, environmentally, to find out why Third Beach maybe gets closed a couple of times a year. And two, the impact on existing wells. But everything over on the east side is slowly being chipped away. And Paul, I know you're concerned about development there, but if you look at the R values for zoning, you'll see it can be developed, but it's going to be on fairly large lots. And there's a lot of undeveloped land there that's not protected by the land trust. That's another thing you need to go out and take a look at. A wastewater management plan, I think, is a responsible thing to do both for the homeowner and for the town. And I say that because having spent some time up in Portsmouth, which was forced to do it, what happens if you have a wastewater management plan approved by DEM, if you have a problem with your system, it can be fixed or repaired with low-cost loans from DEM. Portsmouth also has a bonding system to help people do that. I just think it's a responsible thing to do right now on that side of town. And here's my other dilemma. I'm a planner. I'm supposed to plan for worst-case things. What happens if Joe Schmatz on Indian Avenue has a well that doesn't work anymore, and he goes deeper, and he has no water at his house whatsoever? His well fails. There's no way to get any water out of the ground. What does he do? And what does the town do? And that's my dilemma. I think as a responsible planner, I'm looking at that and saying, what do I tell people? I've talked to some people in town hall after meetings who said, oh, well, the town will do something if my well fails. Well, no, the town won't. And that's one of the things that I worry about. And I think the rest of the planning board worries about. How do we solve that potential dilemma for the well that fails? And do the responsible thing in setting up an inspection system to look at all the septic systems on that side of town in a responsible way.
Thank you, Art. Vice President Welch.
Thank you, Mr. President. So to Art's point, I would have to see, as Mrs. Von Villis points out, some really good data to show me that the septic systems potentially, or not potentially, are the cause of Third Beach being closed due to high content of bacteria. And I'm sure you're aware that when DEM, especially Rhode Island, DEM is a very, they're what they take for, can't think of the word, but so in other words, the sand filters that you see everywhere, once that has been treated from that system and that has to go on original grade, that is considered to be potable water. So I have a hard time finding that would be a cause of beach closures. And if you would then point towards, failing septic systems, well, if we implement the testing, then that should answer that question. And as far as a well that goes dry or you can't get any water out of, I would have a hard time getting behind water to the east side without seeing a number of wells having an issue. I can't think of anybody that ever told me that happened. So you got to have some good data for me to get behind that.
Mr. President.
Mr. Brown.
Just very quickly, we have measured one of the creeks entering Third Beach from the north side. And we have measured human protein in the bacteria. So there is in fact some failure of a septic system that is entering Third Beach. And that is a matter that we'll investigate with money that's been planned for in the upcoming budget. But we do have some testing that indicates that there are or is a failed system somewhere that's having an impact on Third Beach.
So,
Wow.
and I'm not going to dispute that because you have the facts shown and I don't, but I don't know how many of you can recall this, but I certainly do because I lived down that way, grew up down on the end of Green End. And when Francis Nunes had his cows and the cow farm, DEM came down and told him to keep his cows out of the brook that ran down there because that was polluting Third Beach. Well, they took the cows out and it never happened. And now the cows are gone because the farm's gone and there's going to be houses there, unfortunately. But, so I think that they're doing the best they can to identify it, but I think they've made a lot of wrong guesses over time. And that's not a shot at them. It's just, they're doing the best they can. So.
No, and this was town testing,
Mhm.
because there has been concern about closures at Third Beach. And again, it's a measurable human protein that was measured
Yeah.
in one of the tests. And what we need to do is basically go up that creek
Yeah.
and identify where there's a failed system. We had a similar situation with Esplanade Outfall 2. When we went through, looking through all of those illicit
Yeah.
connections, and
Yeah.
we had found washing machines hooked up, that were going.
Oh, yeah.
So it's.
There were septic
Yeah,
septic
but,
systems that were hooked
but-
up to sewer systems that were hooked up.
Right. So Will Cronin has started some of that testing over the past two seasons. And Warren Hall has worked with Steve Cabral to begin the discussion, how to put some money into this upcoming budget to address the situation. So, but we do have some data that indicates that there's an issue in that area.
Yep.
Not a chronic condition across the entire
Yeah,
area.
right. And I think there's issues like that. I don't think we have a knee-jerk reaction and we say we put sewer out there. I think we just try to identify it and correct it. And, we crawl certainly before we run. And again, everybody's intentions are good. But, as Mrs. Vaughn says, always stick to the data. And I'm slowly learning that heeding some of her advice for sure. But, I think that, based on that, again, it was Francis Nunes's cows and then it was the moat and then that filled in over there and we're still having problems. So, it just hasn't been identified yet. So I think everyone's trying to do the right thing. I think this is going to be a large scale. It's millions and millions of dollars that it's going to cost the town. And again, it's not always about cost. It's about doing the right thing and taking the right steps to be able to get there, to make improvements. Doesn't happen overnight, as Sean was just alluding to back in 2002, 2004, up through 2012 or so in that time frame, where we did smoke testing. We identified a lot of I&I issues because the old Orangeburg pipes. We were introduced to the slip lining procedures and methods. So the town has done a lot, and then a lot of things that the residents won't see is the infrastructure under the ground and the money that's been put into that for a good cause. So done a great job there. I do think there's opportunity for improvements. On the east side, I just don't believe it's sewer and water. I think there's some other things that maybe Councilor Welch has alluded to and some testing issues. And I think, again, we walk before we crawl. And Joe, I certainly appreciate your work with the conservation and all the planning board's work. So, Dennis or Terry, you have any comments?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, my comment, I guess, is this has been a very broad discussion. I was anticipating that we would, look at these itemized recommendations and then as a group sort of, decide which ones we wanted to move forward. One, I have questions on them, but I didn't want to kind of jump around and confuse one over another because they're short-term, long-term, there's surface water, groundwater. So I didn't know if at what point we could maybe approach it in that manner. And I did have another question. Once we have reviewed the recommendations individually, the question came up, I think at our April 4th meeting when we first saw this, that, the funding, because a lot of these responsible departments are either planning or Crossman Engineering. We didn't know which how much each item would cost, and if there's a, value to cost assessment that would need to be done. So if we were to approve certain recommendations and then got a cost, would it be coming back to us to say, okay, that's worth the cost, pull the trigger, or once we approve it without knowing the cost, it's a go? But I'm just wondering how this is working.
So, Mrs. Santos,
No, you go ahead.
no, go right ahead. You had your hand up earlier.
No, that's all right. You go reply to Mrs. Flynn.
I'll be getting a phone call tomorrow. I can see it already. Having said that, Terry, it's a good point you bring up. I think I certainly, based on what I heard from Vice President Welch, is that I think, logically, it would make sense to go after or look at the short-term, high priority short-term first. That makes sense to me. Decide what we want to move forward with, hand it off to Sean, and let's get some costs back. Then we can start making some data, then we can start making some decisions on how to proceed from there, or which way direction we go, based on how the group feels and the input from everybody involved here this evening. So if is the council okay with that? Mrs. Vaughn, you good with that? Mrs. Santos? Okay.
Mr. President.
Council Logan, you good? Dennis?
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of prioritizing these. I'm not ready to move forward with establishing a utility at this point. That's in that list. So I'm not for that.
Okay. All right.
So Paul,
Yes, ma'am.
when you say you want to move forward with the high priority short-term recommendations, are we going to discuss each of them, or are
Sure.
you? Okay.
We can, absolutely.
Thank you.
Let's take them one at a time then. So let's start with the surface water, and let's go to the high priority number 1, perform periodic water quality testing of past stormwater treatment systems to document performance for each action step, responsible party and potential funding sources to be identified. So that when this was presented to us, it was surface water first, groundwater, and then traffic. And it was surface water, high priority, groundwater, high priority, and then, at least the way I took it, was traffic wasn't as important as these two. So I think, and that, that's just the way I read it, unless somebody sees it differently. Let's talk about surface water and high priority and item number 1. Does any council have any objection to moving forward with handing this to Sean and saying, getting a cost back on it, and who's responsible for it, and how often it would be, and gathering the data on it? Does any counselor have any objections, or anybody of the planning board have any recommendations further than this, or on top of this? Mrs. Santos,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
You brought up a subject regarding the Nunes property and the cows.
Yes.
If you recall, back in 1973, Valley Road,
I was 10.
I didn't ask you your age. Valley Road was continued from Green End to Quidnick Avenue. And you've got to remember, there are 2 farms abutting Green End Pond. Those farms had cows, correct? Those cows drank the water from Green End Pond. Valley Road was put through, no more cows, the farms were sold. This brings me to the surface water impact that I'd like to ask a question of the planning board. Have any of you noticed that there is a trench? And if you know the Durfee lot, it is at the corner of Valley and Green and Avenue. I believe the city of Newport has put a trench and a fence which will collect the water from all the hills, and it goes into Green End Pond. Did the city of Newport, and whoever wants to answer on the planning board, did the city of Newport request permission from the planning board to put that trench so that the water that's collected at the bottom goes into the drinking water?
I think that's more of a question for Sean. I did see they've done some work there. I just thought the town was aware of it. It's on the easterly side of the rundown fence towards the Durfee lot, towards the back of the Durfee lot.
Okay, then my next question is, and I think that you don't regard traffic as a priority. Summer is coming. Now, everybody with new cars has, what do you call, GPSs in the cars, which will give them shortcuts to get off of this island. They come in from Newport when the bars close or when the people finish working, they find the shortest cut to get off this island to go back home where they live. Traffic is going to become a problem on this island, and it's getting worse each year. People are finding the shortcuts to get off, and they don't care about the speed limits. What's been taken care of lately has been Turner's Road. Police have been stopping cars there. They've been giving the tickets to the speeders. They're not doing 35, they're doing 51 and more. So traffic is a concern during the summertime on this island, and it's getting to be more and more year-round. So we got to do something about traffic on this island, get our police do our town roads, not state roads. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a recommendation to the GPS folks that Morrison Avenue is a good way to.
You don't have to recommend it. They already know it.
I'm just kidding. No, I didn't. I hope I didn't come across as not important. It's just based on the build-out study, the groundwater, the surface, but I agree, it's an enforcement issue. So, so having said that, does any councilors have any objections to Sean moving forward with surface water impacts, high priority number 1, short-term recommendations?
Collect the data.
Collect the data. Okay. Everybody's good on that?
Yes.
Okay. Short-term recommendations, second short-term recommendations, establish stormwater utility and pursue additional retrofits of existing systems for each action step. Responsible party potential funding source to be identified. Any conversation around this?
Take a vote. Go for it. Aye.
This is establishing a stormwater utility. I certainly wouldn't support it, but if the majority supports it, it gets supported.
I think we need to find out as much information as possible. Again, we're talking about data.
Mhm. I don't disagree, Mrs. Von Villis, but I think we already had this data. It is a different council. So to your point, but in my own opinion, we had the data and I made a decision. Council Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. So right now, just to clarify again, all we would really be finding out from Mr. Brown is how much each one of these tasks would cost. And then it's going to come back to us, is it not? And we're going to say that's worth the cost or it's not. And for this particular item, this may be more of a public hearing type of thing because it will impact, so many of our residents directly.
Yeah. Don't forget now, this was the one where there was a formula for residents being charged for rain that falls in front of their property.
I understand. And I guess all I'm saying is the only action item for the ones that we say are okay with us is we're just going to find out how much it's going to cost. So you have the 3 columns, the description of the recommendation, the responsible department or organization, and then the time frame to complete. It should come back to us with a 4th column, how much it would cost. Unless it's going to be an exorbitant cost to find out how much it's going to cost, I don't see why that's not bad data to get. That seems to be fair data to get.
Okay. I'm not sure why we already had the data. I don't know how much it's changed, but
that's a good point. Would the data be markedly different from, do we have a date as to when the last time data was?
I don't think the people's frontage has changed, but I'm sure that data should be available.
It's up to the council.
Okay.
How old is it?
But
Excuse me, how
yes.
old is it?
About 4
Yeah, I would say 3 or 4 years, but we have units, units of construction that we can update. I mean, it's,
Okay.
I think you're sort of splitting hairs in some ways. It's, I want to buy a new car. I can afford a Corolla or a Civic, or I can afford a McLaren, and this is more, it's expensive. It would
Yeah.
probably feel more like a McLaren. So whether it's an orange McLaren or a blue McLaren, it's still
It
pretty
is
pricey. So I think we can work with Steve Cabral and get some updated pricing.
Yeah.
And it's easy enough to reload those schedules and present those to you.
Yep. I'm going to throw this out there because it's on my mind and I can't help it. A lot of people are struggling as it is to hold on to their properties, to be able to get people up in arms about potentially paying another tax for water that falls in front of their property to be treated. I would say I already pay taxes for that. So that's just my opinion. Council Welch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought part of this exercise is that we were trying to prioritize what we want to go out for costs, so I understand that, but I say that we should probably vote council-wide because in principle, I disagree with this. So
Okay.
I don't care what the number is. I don't even want to put the effort in. And I agree that if the majority says they want to hear what the number is, well, then we go through the motions. But speaking, as you said, from the constituents, the people that I listen to, nobody's in favor of this. So
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, Council Toronto, did you have your hand up?
I did.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I agree with Tom. I mean, when this was in front of us before, there was a lot of pushback, trying to figure out how we're going to create a utility tax based on the roof sizes and how much asphalt you have in your driveway. It's got to be enforceable. I mean, we got to be able to maintain it. We got to be able to monitor it. Things change. Why do I have to pay? When my water goes on my yard, it doesn't go into the street. So why am I paying at all? I mean, it was just very unmanageable. If this is an issue that the town has, and we need to step up and make it happen, not create a monster of a project to administer. We have spent tens of millions of dollars on stormwater runoff. When I first got onto the council, this was the #1 priority. We spent millions of dollars on about 20 or 12 to 15 different stormwater collection areas. And when I first got on it, I found that most of those collection areas were collecting a lot of litter. So I think we should really go and determine whether they're even working, that we've already spent $10 million on different stormwater programs. We slip lined all our sewer lines because they were failing. And so I think we got other areas that we can look into to determine where our problems are and try to identify them rather than trying to create a tax to put onto our people so that our residents, so that we can do what with it? Create more runoff stormwater collection areas? I mean, please. We've got other things that we need to be spending money on.
Mr. President,
Mrs. Flynn.
just to move this along, I'm wondering if I could make a motion for the short term to approve getting prices for items number 1, 3, and 4 on the surface water short-term recommendations.
You took the words right out of my mouth, and I'm going to second that motion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, thank you. We have a motion and a second on whether we want to move forward with establishing a stormwater utility and pursue additional to get costs on that.
Wait a minute. Just numbers 1, 3, and 4 on the short-term surface waters.
We're talking about number 2.
Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry. I jumped ahead because the 1 and 3 and 4 are testing and collecting data and whatnot. Sorry.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second on number 2. All in favor?
Can you say what the motion is again, please?
The motion is we're looking for whether or not we want to move forward with Sean obtaining data, updated data and costs on establishing a stormwater utility and pursue additional retrofits of existing systems.
Okay, so that's different from what Terry said. I think she was looking to just move ahead and say yes to 1, 3, and 4.
Okay, I didn't.
And
ta-
not
I'm
to
sorry.
2.
I'm sorry. I didn't take it that way. Is that
I
Terry?
think, is that right,
Is
Terry?
that what you were referring to? 1, 3, and 4?
Yes, it was. I think that, because we can always come back to a stormwater utility, but I think in the short term, our water conditions are worsening as we speak, and we should get some of the short-term things triggered and moved on. So that was my proposal for the surface water short-term to get prices for 1, 3, and 4.
Okay, I was confused because we were talking about number 2, which is
And
also a short term.
Yeah, and I confused you because I was going one by one, but because the conversations have been lengthy, I thought
Okay.
I would.
Okay, so we'll go to that, your particular motion, 1, 3, and 4. Getting cost and data on that. We have a motion and a second on that. Are you clear?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll repeat it again, just so that everybody's on the same page. We're talking about surface water impacts,
Right.
high priority, short-term recommendations. The motion is to move forward with items 1, 3, and 4 of getting data and costs.
Right, so that's not committing to doing.
No,
That's
it's just,
collecting
no,
information.
it's all it is.
Okay,
That's all it is.
okay.
Everybody understand that and everybody clear? Any further questions or discussions? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Okay. That does not include number 2. Do you want to continue discussion on number 2?
No, I wouldn't like to right now, but that's just me.
Okay. No, is there any, do you want to, let's vote on number 2?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that anything that involves collecting information, I do not see why we would not want to do that. Anything.
I understand you.
Information.
My opinion is we've done that.
Then update it.
Okay.
So if we have it, all we need to do is update it. But the point is information is information. Why would we not ever want information?
Okay.
Counselor Von Villis?
Let's just,
Mr. President, sorry.
yes, Counselor Flynn.
If I could just address Counselor Von Villis's point, and I support that position. However, information changes over time. And if the appetite of the council and our population is not to pull the trigger on this, spending time or paying a professional to even get, or our staff to get this information that may ultimately be obsolete by the time we're ready to actually move on it, doesn't make sense to me.
Okay.
But one of the things about getting information over time is that you create a trend. You can see a trend, and the trend itself is information.
Okay. I know Dennis doesn't want to move forward with it. Counselor Logan?
I'm going to throw this in here. I don't think our residents have an appetite for another expense. And that's exactly what establishing a utility is. They do not want it right now. Everybody's been hit in the pocket by COVID. There are questions about taxes and their assessments. Can we please not throw something else at them right now?
Okay.
Let's roll this back, focus on testing and quality. And then when the time's right, if we understand from the testing and quality that number 2 is a big issue, then we can address it. But throwing something else on the plate of the resident right now, not a good path.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm getting the feel that the discussion on this is over. Okay. Let's move on to groundwater, high priority, short-term recommendations.
Oh, Mr. President, are we not talking at all about long-term considerations?
We can. I'd rather get through the short-term first because that seems to be the most pressing issues.
Okay, that's okay for the surface water, but for the groundwater, I actually wanted some additional, or actually, let me see. Wanted some additional information from the planning board about the long term. I mean, I have questions
Okay.
about the long term for the surface water as well, but
Go ahead and ask that. Go ahead and ask that question.
you sure?
They're right in front of you right now.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my question for number 7, and this is again, long-term considerations for surface water, identify and prioritize flood-prone areas for remediation action. Was this part of the water traffic study So has some of that already been done? The
Paul, I
one that
think
was
if you-
presented December 14th to the council?
This came out of the impact study. I don't know if anything has been done already, Terry.
Okay. The time frame on numbers 5, 6, and 7 under surface water, the 18 to 36 months for each of them, is that a concurrent time frame? So working on them all together would take 18 to 36 months, or would each of them take that amount of time? I wasn't quite sure how to read it.
Ron, you polled the other department heads. Do you know the answer to that question?
I think the thinking was it would be each project on its own would take that amount of time. So of course, if you're trying to do several things at the same time, depending on resources, that could impact the timeframes.
Okay. And are 5, 6, and 7 in prioritized order?
I'm not sure, Joe. Joe might be able to speak to this better. You're muted, Joe. Joe, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. Yeah, they are prioritized. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. And I asked that because it seems like number 6 could be done right away.
It has been done. I think number 6, and correct me if I'm wrong, I see working with Hugendorns. I've seen them working with Rhode Island Nursery. Rhode Island Nursery, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, did their whole, on East Main Road, they have a whole pond in the back and everything. They did a bunch of that. And I know, I was glad to see, I'm glad to report when I was driving down Berkeley the other day, that one of the water retention seems to be working very well. So I don't know where we are in this, but I know there's been some work on this as far as long-term. Yeah, Wapping Road. So I don't know if Joe or somebody from the planning board or Ron or Sean wants to talk to these long-term. I'm not sure what work is done, but besides maybe tweaking some ordinance, or maybe there's some other areas we're not aware of that need attention.
Yeah, just throwing it out there to get additional information on the recommendation. And it does seem like number 7 should be done and before, and then be a part of number 5. Once you identify the flood areas, then you work on the stormwater ordinance. So if they are prioritized, I guess I wanted to know a little bit of why. I don't need to know tonight, unless you want to explain it quickly, because those are the long term.
I think they're really good points, and what I would recommend is that why don't we revisit those, and then we'll make give you some additional input through Ron, how we would address the concerns you raised tonight on those.
Okay, that'd be great.
All right.
Thank you so much. Yep.
Sure.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. Okay, so Terry, does that satisfy you and the rest of the council long-term? Okay, let's go to short-term, groundwater, high priority, short-term recommendations. Number 1 is establish on-site wastewater management plan and ordinance. Again, for each action step, responsible party and potential funding source to be identified. Sean, or Ron, or whoever, do you want to kind of explain this, what's being asked? Wastewater is a pretty broad.
This is the program that Councilor Welch was talking about, with some sort of monitoring of private wastewater systems, septic systems on people's properties. This is actually something that we already have prepared. The council looked at once, so it could be easily, reviewed and brought back for consideration.
Okay. Councilor Toronto?
Thank you. I think Art was talking a little bit about this in regards to what was going on in Portsmouth. We had this in front of us at one point in regards to a service that was being offered to our residents to inspect and look at their wells and septic. And there were actually money that could fund these projects. But I think the residents didn't support it. And I don't know if it was kind of a pushback that, people didn't want us going out and inspecting their wells or looking at their septic and things along those lines. I know I'm kind of mixing a little bit here, but I mean, I'm not sure what's changed since the last time. So I'm just kind of curious. I was kind of surprised that people don't check their wells and have a certified, certify your well and certify your septic. I mean, I do that with my home every year. I kind of monitor it and check it, make sure it's, it's running efficiently and there's no issues. So I was kind of miffed about it during the time, but the people had decided they didn't want it. So we're here to represent the people, but I'm definitely interested in, has it resurfaced, and are the people willing to step up and start monitoring their wells and their septic to make sure we don't have water issues? I just don't know. At first, they didn't want to do it.
Hang on one sec, Sean.
So I was going to say that, so this is only septic systems. It's not inspecting people's drinking water. And
I'm
I
sorry,
think
septic.
Yep. And I think we can go back, and with the input that we received when this was last heard from the public, we could tweak it so that it's less burdensome to residents. But one of the major benefits of having a plan is that it would open up the availability of low-cost loans to people who have to repair their systems through the state's revolving loan program. And that would be a benefit for people on the east side. So I think we can go back and tweak the ordinance that we've developed. We can make it easier for residents so that it's not a burden financially or administratively, but it could be something that at least helps protect neighbors from people that don't take care of their systems, and also provides the benefit of low-cost loans in the event that someone has to upgrade their system.
Okay. Mr. Weber?
Let me just add to that. Sean's right on the mark. And as I said, I went to Portsmouth to find out what they're doing. And they have a clerk, a person up there that full-time job is to set up an inspection schedule, make sure it's followed, and take care of the paperwork and the rest of it. And if there's a problem with it, it goes to Superior Court if there's non-compliance, that kind of thing. But it's fairly simple and it works for them. So I don't think it's burdensome, and the cost probably is about, it's going to be borne by the homeowner for the septic inspection. It's $325, something like that. And if you look at Massachusetts, if you want to sell a house and have a septic system, you have to go through what's called a Section 5 inspection. And I just think it's a smart idea for the town for the reasons I said earlier.
Okay. Council Toronto?
That's great. Art, thank you very much for that. That's definitely, I appreciate that real estate side of things when the property exchanges hands. There was a penalty, if I remember right, that if you did volunteer for people to come out and actually look at your system and it fails, then you had a certain amount of time to fix it or you were penalized. So I think that was a little bit of the stick versus a carrot. So I was just curious, maybe if there's a change, we should look that if people volunteer and they decide not to do something about it, that's their choice. The town has the ability to say, nope, once you've tested and we identified it, then you've got to do something. Then you're penalized if you don't. They're not going to volunteer for you to come look. So that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, but it's not a voluntary system, and it's a mandatory system. And that's the way it is in Portsmouth. However, we might do it here. I don't know, but if we're going to do it, we need to do it on a mandatory basis, and that's how it goes. So,
okay. Town solicitor.
Just a brief comment on that. One of the things, and folks on the planning board are aware of this, when we're reviewing development.
Peter, speak up, please, or lean towards the microphone, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Quite often with the planning board, zoning board, when we're reviewing projects these days on the east side of town, groundwater quality, effect on well water is a huge issue. It comes up in every single development. And if we're not going to be extending water service, public water, to that part of town, then I think it is important that the town be doing something to ensure that the folks who live out there who have wells, or someone who builds a new house who's going to have to rely upon a well, is able to have that groundwater protected from a non-performing or failed septic system. So it is, and I think we can tweak this ordinance not to make it overly burdensome. I think, as Sean mentioned, there's a great benefit to having, if you have a failed system, to have low-cost funds available to fix that system in a way that's economically feasible. But once again, it is important to try to make sure that we're protecting the drinking water for the folks that live out on the east side of town if we're not going to be providing public water. I think you've got to do sort of one or the other here. And if the cost of public water is considered to be too high by the residents out there, the cost of this it would be minuscule compared to the cost of having to bring public utilities out there.
When they're not legally bound by having to do either one, though.
Well, if you were,
That's just more opinion than legal.
yes, but the ordinance would require that.
Okay.
If you did.
Okay.
Just-
Council Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so first of all, I just want to ask, again, questions on these items, and I'm going to jump into long-term considerations because the number 5, I actually thought that would be something to do almost immediately. Evaluate minimum lot sizes for homes with wells, including cluster developments. That seems like something that would be a pull the trigger right now, get that established and get it on the books to protect the area and those with wells. So that's my first question or comment. And I think this, again, I'm hearing this proposal of the on-site wastewater management plan is sort of paralleling the stormwater utility for me, in that it's one more thing that people right now, they don't need another mandate. They don't need another potential expense. But I think that a lot of it could be mitigated by number 3, the short-term recommendation number 3, education, awareness, voluntary programs, and then tie all that in with number 4 and start being very aggressive about, showing people what they have, how to take care of it, and getting some of that data. So I think that 3, 4, and 5, especially 5, should be a short term, and maybe the on-site wastewater be considered shortly down the road, though. Thoughts, comments? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr.
Ron, is the gentleman on from Crossman?
Yeah, Steve Cabral is on.
So is there a reason why, based on Councilor Flynn's comments, that 5 is long-term versus short-term?
That was a discussion with the subcommittee. If the clerk can let Steve maybe speak, he might be able to add something.
Oh, hello, this is Steve Cabral with Crossman Engineering.
Hi, Steve.
Yep, how are you all?
Good.
Oh, good, thanks. Well, one comment I'd like to make on the wastewater management plan is that the intent is not to create additional maintenance or inspection burdens that don't already exist. See, the unknown is that when DEM issues a permit for a septic system, that homeowner is responsible to monitor and inspect the system. The problem that exists is that there's lack of educational awareness of their responsibilities as a homeowner. So one of the reasons we felt this would be priority 1 is that, as Sean pointed out, the document was essentially prepared a few years ago, and it could easily be fine-tuned to make it less burdensome. And also, any costs, we could certainly refine the clerical aspects to make sure the costs are minimized. And certainly, I know there was one comment about penalties, that the penalty certainly could be eliminated if there is one. But by far the greatest benefit to the community and the residents are there'll be the low-cost funding through the state will become available. And until the town enacts an on-site wastewater management plan, the state won't allow the town to access those funds. And again,
There it was.
okay. Oh, and again, one last comment. When we prepared the initial plan, we did make sure that we did not increase the burden of inspections. That's not already required by DEM. It's just that they're not known. Oh, and back to Councilwoman Flynn's comment about number 5. Again, when it comes to the priorities, you know, the planning board subcommittee and planning board members did establish those, but I can say that during the discussion on number 5, which has to do with evaluating the lot sizes for homes with wells, is that we recognized that in order to change the minimum lot sizes, we'd have to go through a process of multiple public hearings because we'd actually be amending the zoning ordinance. So I believe the general consensus was that we recognize that there is a time constraint or a time demand to do that. So we proposed the priorities in a manner that we had items that could be quickly enacted upon.
Okay.
Steve, that's exactly correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mrs. Flynn.
Thank you very much, Steve and Joe, for clarifying the logic there. And I understand the logic, but, you know, I will also say there's a perspective that, you know, zoning and ordinances are changed all the time. And I think that this is something that is so important for, you know, as you said before, Joe, all those applications that are going to be coming into Middletown. If you have this established, you immediately protect the town, you know, from development that isn't really appropriate under this umbrella. So I would like to see 5 moved up and get into in queue.
All right, and my question is really to Steve. Steve, with wells and lots in their sizes, right? We have kind of dimensional standards that have to be adhered to in terms of you know, septic systems and wells and the distance between them. Is that correct? So almost by default, there are some guidelines that dictate lot sizes just based on what we have on the books today. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it might just require some tweaking and to look at it, you know, from a different lens, you know, as we're discussing these impacts on groundwater. But yeah, we can look at shifting that in terms of a priority item. For sure.
Thank you.
I would call on Art.
All right, Mr. Weber.
Sorry, Paul. I couldn't stand it. He had his hand up like 3 or 4 times.
I know, but I'm trying to do the best I can to.
You're doing a great job.
Let the discussion
You're
evolve.
doing a good job.
So
Well,
thank you, Dennis.
You are. You're doing it awesome. Thank
I
you.
call this thing tonight the Paul and Paul Show, so we're in good shape here. I want to remind everybody that the comp plan has sway here on this issue of wastewater management plan. On the comp plan, which was adopted way back in 3/2/15, in the Natural and Ecological Resources, Chapter 3, page 18, the town, it says, this is the language, it was adopted and approved, the town should establish a wastewater management district. So it's also in one of our most important documents next to the charter. And I just lend that to support my case, supported from another vantage point.
Okay, I don't know, guys, unless I'm missing something here, I don't see an abundance of, of wells failing out there. I don't see abundance of septic systems failing out there. I think people do a pretty good job of policing each other. Again, these are additional burdens we need to consider that we're putting on people. I think there's obviously, it's just me speaking out loud, there's some opportunities to improvements, but it's not like, to my knowledge, it's not like what Portsmouth had in Island Park, where there was a bunch of failing systems and it needed to be addressed, and they basically told DEM to pound sand. Having said that, I'm very cautious of putting additional burdens on people. If it makes sense to do, if there's an issue, sure. If somebody can tell me there's one failing well out there or one failing septic system out there, then okay, let's look at this. But if we're just doing this because we want to move forward and we want a plan, a wastewater plan, I'm not going to support that. I got to tell you. So that's just me. But whatever the pleasure of the council is, Vice President Welch.
Thank you. So similar to the last one, I think that 1 and 3 are fine. I'm against 2. But to speak to your point about number 1, one of the problems with septic systems is that it's okay if you live there when it was installed and you understand how it works. But if the house has been flipped or, a couple of different owners have gone by and nothing is apparent, then it just goes on. So I think the reminder to everyone, whether it be educationally or even the threat of some sort of oversight is important. I agree, as the planning board has said, as we continue to build out, I want my water to be protected, but I'll tell you, if someone's sewage is on the ground because their system's failing, you're going to know, and I will go knock on the door. So I don't have a problem that way. So anyway, I would be behind 1 and 3, but not 2.
Okay, Council Santos.
Thank you, sir. In regards to what Mr. Welch just finished saying, and I have to question, if a house is sold, I'm not a realtor, do they not have to, if they don't have sewer and they have well water, do they not have to be tested before the house is sold?
They have to be inspected.
They have to be inspected.
They do.
Okay, thank you.
Council Logan.
Is there a frequency for testing that we have an ordinance now that homeowners have to perform? It just seems like it'd be natural preventative maintenance. Like there's a personal amount of accountability, responsibility on the homeowner. You want to make sure that your sewage is tested if you're not on public sewer to make sure it's functioning appropriately. Maybe we can put something in place to have them test on their own, report back, right? I think it's short-sighted that if we don't look at this and don't afford the opportunity for like those loans programs for people who do have failing systems, that's on us now because we're not giving them that tool. But again, there's a level of personal accountability here at the same time as that. You have to be a responsible citizen. I bought my house where I bought my house because I wanted public water and public sewer. Right? That was my choice. Somebody else chooses the other way. There's a certain level of responsibility that they have to go through to make sure that they're not polluting the fresh drinking water of their neighbors. So I'm just wondering and trying to understand, is there a frequency that there should be testing done? Are people actually doing that testing or do they just not know? A lot of questions.
No, Sean.
New guy questions.
I'm actually going to ask Steve Cabral to weigh in here because I think he's the most familiar with the DEM regulations. But without an ordinance right now, we're relying on the state's regulations to set the standard. So Steve, if maybe you could chime in here.
Oh, yes. Yeah, DEM does have a guidance document for homeowners to follow in regards to inspection and maintenance. And the inspection and maintenance is really based upon the size of the home, the number of bedrooms, and the anticipated flow, as well as the age of the system. And so what the management plan was going to do was just memorialize the state guidelines and make it part of an educational program so that the homeowners will know what they should be doing. And as the council member said, the greatest benefit is that if it does fail, they'll have access to the low interest loans.
I just think it's preventative maintenance. You know, I get my boiler checked every year for a very specific reason. Why wouldn't we do this same thing here? I don't see that as a burden. I see it as a responsibility of the homeowner.
Right. Sean, was this part of the survey we put out to the east side?
No, this is an ordinance that was drafted, and it's it's based on an ordinance, a model from DEM. It's adopted in many communities throughout the state. And as Steve was pointing out, you know, as I recall, based on that first inspection, there's a recommendation which goes back to what you're saying, where based on, and what Steve was saying, based on the size of the house, the size of the system, the amount of use, you know, there's a frequency in which the system is maintained and re-inspected to ensure that it's working properly. I mean, I think a lot of the arguments that were brought up, I think there were two issues. One is the on-site wastewater ordinance came forward to the council at the same time as the stormwater utility. So I think we were quicker to lump the two together and dismiss them. And I think the second is just, again, a lot of the discussion that's happening here where I'm a responsible homeowner. I take care of my septic system versus I would like someone to take some action to make sure that my property is protected. So again, I think this is something we could easily go back, look at, make it less burdensome, and not bring it to the council for the purposes of a first reading, but bring it back so that you could consider whether or not it's something you're interested in.
Okay. I just want to make sure though, Chris, in the previous one that came before us, it wasn't as simple as, you know, as you're saying, it was more burdensome financially, and there was more restrictions on it with, you know, every so many years, the town would come in and inspect it, and, you know, and then we were found out that, well, DM already has these measures in place. So we were going on top of their measures and creating more dollars for them to have to put out. And as Sean said, it was lumped in, just like it was lumped in again here with the stormwater. So I get what you're saying. It makes sense. I have no issue going back if it's going to be tweaked and taking a second look at it, but not in its original form, because if that's what the council wants to do, then that's what they'll do. But I certainly wouldn't support that.
And I don't want to place any unnecessary burden on anybody.
We were going, in my opinion, over the top on what DEM already, and then we were going to go educational. We decided, well, why can't we educate them? And I don't know what we've done since then as far as education. I don't think we've done anything.
If we're just I hate to say enforcing, that's not the right word, but if we're embracing what the DEM's recommendations are for best practices, I don't see what's wrong with it.
But ours was on top. Ours was over more than that.
So I wouldn't support more than. I would want to go to that.
And that's the tweak and Sean's talking about.
That's the baseline I would like to.
Okay. Okay.
Good.
Councilor Welch.
Just one last thing. DEM does have those recommendations, but there is no oversight. So they, you know, you can look up on the site and see what it says, but nobody's going to make you do it.
Understood.
So one possibility along with the education here is, I think, an easier implementation would be to say that based on your tank size or number of bedrooms, whatever you want to pick as a factor, DEM recommends that for my house every other year. So every other year, 536 Mitchell's Lane. Yep, he sent a certificate from Hallman Septic because they came and you know, and Hallman is
Pumped it out or whatever.
Yeah, well, they pump it out and they can
Right.
they can have an opinion box, you know, failing, problems, nothing's a problem. So I'm doing it as my regular maintenance anyway. I email or maybe even Holman emails it right to the town, or I provide them with a copy and I'm good.
I
And you
think-
can have a list.
Yeah,
of
they would
people.
have to provide their own independent,
I'm sorry?
because if they have to provide their own independent person that's going to do it, pump it, susceptible, only because, you could get somebody that,
Right.
might be that great salesperson that just wants to drive their business through the roof. Here's an opportunity. And that's what I'm cautious of with the residents.
Understood.
Yeah.
I just thrown it out there.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the council's okay with moving forward with one, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, 1, 3, 4, and 5.
Mr. President,
I don't know if we talked about one.
Council Flynn.
actually, Dennis did have his hand up before me, Mr. President, for a while.
Well, your voice beats his voice. Mr. Toronto.
Thank you.
Well, there's already a state regulation where you're supposed to be testing your system. It's just not being enforced. Am I right on that, Peter?
I'm once again going to defer to Steve. I think that these are, unless you have an advanced system which actually requires a maintenance contract, I think, and Steve can correct me, I think these are guidelines, but not requirements that are enforced by DEM. Steve, can you?
Oh, yes, I can say that the regulations specifically state that the homeowner is responsible to maintain and inspect their system, but they don't go any further than that. They have a separate guidance document for how frequently the maintenance and inspection should be performed. So there is a lack of an educational program at the state level.
Okay. And then when we're talking about number one, about the establishing the waste management plan, okay? So this is now another plan, another department, more people to manage this plan. Not exactly sure what this plan entails. I'm kind of trying to rack my brain going backwards because this is in front of us again. But I think one of the big stumbling blocks in this plan was that that we would penalize them if they have a system that's subject to need to be changed. They're going to have to find financing. And if they don't find the financing, and if they don't do it, they're going to get fined. And there's a burden that's being put on the people under this waste management program. So I'm not interested in establishing anything until we actually know the details. So if you're saying, hey, let's go get the details to this waste management program that we already once talked about, and now we're going to rekindle this process, and now we want to repropose something, I'm all for that. But I'm not voting to instill something right now based on previous notes.
Council Flynn.
So I think Mr. Weber wanted to respond. Because
I'll run the meeting. Your
Oh,
hand was up before Dennis's. Dennis was, and then it was you, and then it's Art.
okay, it was probably relevant to what Dennis said, but I will go ahead and thank you very much for the floor. So I think that I don't disagree with Councilor Toronto. Number one, there is a few unknowns. There's really no evidence of a problem. It seems like those who own wells or in that area have a handle on when they see if something's failing or there is a problem. I think both number 1 and 2 would require a public hearing. And as I read number 3 and 4 and 5, as you increase public awareness and education, it's going to by default offer that protection and cover exactly what you're thinking that this management plan would do. So I'm thinking that, going ahead with number 3 and 4, making 4 and 5 short-term recommendations, by default, you're going to improve the situation. Not that there's a problem, but you're certainly going to have people more aware of it and taking on that responsibility, even though the state is not enforcing their mandates or their recommendations. It just seems that, I would make a motion to go forward with, for the groundwater, number 3 is the short-term recommendation, and number 4 and 5, make them short-term recommendations based on the conversation.
Terry, you're not going to believe this, but I think you're spot on.
I don't believe it. You just want this meeting to end. You want to say meeting adjourned.
I think, no, I don't. I want to make sure we thoroughly vet this, but I think that was
I
very
agree.
well. I think logically, to me, again, that makes sense, exactly what you said and how you said it in the order you said it.
Thank you.
I don't know how the other councils feel. Tom, you good with that? Council Logan?
One question.
Yes.
If we do not adopt high priority number 1, do we not give our residents the opportunity to take advantage of financing to fix the problems that are identified? Is that off the table? So that's off the table if we don't adopt number 1.
So we're not talking about adopting. This is just about going forward with gaining information.
Right. So in response to what Dennis said earlier, they have to go out and find financing. Once they find a problem, this would enable them to have financing at their fingertips to solve that problem, should it be identified. So I'm fine with moving forward. I just want that on the table as food for thought. If we're not going to move forward with number 1, that's immediately removed from any equation.
Yep, it is.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
can I just respond real quick to Chris there?
Yes,
Chris,
Council Tom.
that is definitely an advantage of the low, and that was one of the enticements to have attractive financing, okay? But again, it was touched with the stick in the, in regards to down the road, if you don't take advantage of it, there are other penalties along the way. So that's where it started falling apart. Financing's great. Financing is something that's available right now. The town could actually try to assist in finding someone who may assist in financing, or groups that may want to get involved in financing to assist these folks in regards to, fixing their issues and financing it. So I appreciate what you're saying there. It is an attraction. I don't know how, when you look at it financially, it makes a little bit sense because it is a good rate and they are sort of guaranteeing it. But again, there's a lot of penalties tied to the program as a whole.
Yeah. And again, I appreciate that. And I'm looking at it with brand new eyes. I don't have that back history that every other counselor has.
Just for the record, Council Logan, about the 3-month mark, the brand new eyes and the newbie stuff, it's one off. I'm just letting you know. I know. I'm just kidding you. I'm just kidding with you.
Chris, I can get you that info.
Thank you.
Okay, and Sean can provide you that as well too. So, Terry, Mr. Weber.
Okay, a couple of quick things here to clean the board off. I have a memo here that I referenced earlier that was from our esteemed chairman of the planning board, May 10, 2018, which sent a proposed on-site wastewater management plan to the town council. I don't have, or I don't think anybody else in the planning board has a response to that particular memo. So if somebody could go back and find out what the decision was and send it to us, I would appreciate it, number one. Number two, one person in Portsmouth, not a department, one person runs the entire system of setting up inspections, making sure they occur, etc. And it's been pointed out, if we do have a plan, there is a low loan rate, and also Portsmouth itself set up another bond to assist and supplement those kind of projects also, and we could do that. So the idea is not to make this into a death sentence for people. It's to be respectful of the environment and our people that are on well water on that side of town. And if they need help, they can get it in a reasonable way.
Thank you, Art. Council Flynn, would you mind repeating your motion, please?
Yes, so the motion would be to approve the short-term groundwater item number 3 and make the long-term recommendations number 4 and 5 short-term recommendations and approve those as well.
Okay. Do we have a second? Council Welch seconds it. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody
Aye.
opposed?
Opposed?
Okay. Any of you guys want to have conversation around traffic? Any appetite
Oh,
for that? It's closing in on 9, or have you had enough?
Well, are we going to come back to it, or can I make a comment?
You can make a comment. We're right here today. Yep.
Okay, so I just, as I read this, I was thinking back about the lessons learned when we as a town did the traffic recommendations and changes. For example, the roundabout at on Purgatory and Valley on Aquidneck, and the signages on Paradise, and how the process to consider to avoid the gaffes and the extra time that it took to get it right is to, instead of meeting with the town departments first, is to have a meeting with the public and the neighbors first and get their input, and then meet with the town departments, and then meet with the public again to make sure they like the plan. We have seen this in a number of different situations where a plan, a plan's made by the town, they meet with the neighbors, and then they execute the ultimate plan. And then the neighbors go, that's not going to work, or we don't like that. Everything has to stop and be redone again. So it's a procedural concept that I am throwing out there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Any appetite to talk about traffic this evening, besides Terry's comments? From the planning board, from administration, from any council members?
I'll wrap it up with a motion to hold a public workshop with the neighbors on the intersections that you want to talk about.
Which intersections are those, Terry?
Let me see, the ones they identify. They just say intersection priorities for town and state roads and intersections. I don't think they have actually listed them.
They're listed in the report.
Well, I have the memo only, the March 18th memo is what I'm looking at.
I think
the
Terry,
recommendations.
But I certainly would have no issue with that. I would like to know what they are first, because we don't have those in front of us before we just throw it out there. Okay. You're okay with
Understood.
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we can certainly revisit that. Well, listen, it was really nice sitting here discussing and getting your take and getting your feedback on things that are working well. We certainly heard that you need more feedback from us as a council when we don't take your recommendations. And also from the zoning board, Peter, based on certain decisions that are made. But I certainly think this is healthy. Again, we're not always going to agree on everything, but every single person sitting in this room or on Zoom is always going to do what's in the best interest of Middletown. And I think that's at the end, that's the end game, is to do what's best. And again, we may see different avenues to get there. But as long as we're pulling the rope from the same end, I think good things will continue to happen. And I do want to say that, and I'm not just saying it because you're in front of us, we see all the work you do and all the time you put in. The average citizen in Middletown does not see that. So it's with great respect and gratefulness that for the work and time that you put in. And I'm sure I can speak for everybody in this, every counselor in this room, for all your hard work, whether it's subdivisions, whether it's whatever it is, the subcommittees, the ways you're trying to improve the town, thinking outside the box. It's all good stuff, and I want to say thank you. And I'm sure everyone else feels the same
Hear,
way.
hear.
Mr. President, I just want to thank you and members of the council for the time you've given us. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, Paul, it's good stuff, and I'm looking forward to we're all looking forward. It's a fairly new group. And I think we're all looking forward to working together and making things better in Middletown, because that's what we're all charged to do. So, having said that,
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Again, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.